Chapter 1045. Ouyang Shuo summoned Zhang Liang for two matters. First, arrange for Zhang Liang to join the cabinet as a Palm Seal Grand Scholar. The name of the advisor pavilion means that you need to participate in the decision-making of the court and observe the politics from time to time. I know that Zifeng doesn't have much interest in the specific affairs of the court. Entering the cabinet is not to fight for power, but to observe. Ouyang Shuo explained. Zhang Liang nodded and said, I understand. When Zhang Liang followed Liu Bang as a strategist, the Great Han Dynasty had yet to establish a perfect structure of the court. Zhang Liang was close enough to know the highest decisions of the Han Dynasty. Great Xia was different. It had a complete system. If the officials were not in their positions, they would not be involved in politics. Although the cabinet of advisors could receive the imperial court bulletin, it was still not as direct as entering the cabinet. Zhang Liang had a deep understanding of this point, so he readily agreed. Ouyang Shuo hoped that the officials and generals who pledged allegiance to Great Xia would continue to improve and not stick to the rules. Even Zhang Liang had room for improvement. Second, set up a state affair research center in the advisor pavilion. The current advisor pavilion was indeed luxurious, but the members were all strategists. If it was during the time of conquering the country, this would be what countless rulers wished for. Great Xia had to conquer and defend the country at the same time. This put forward higher requirements for the advisor pavilion. In addition to formulating external combat strategies, they also had to study the internal problems of the dynasty and propose practical and innovative measures. The State Affair Research Center was set up for this purpose. In addition to strategists, Ouyang Shuo wanted to introduce more professionals, including experts in economics, culture, education, and so on. On the basis of investigation and research, they would propose more scientific and professional decision-making consultation. In short, the State Affair Research Center was a think tank for the dynasty. Hearing this, Zhang Liang was both excited and ashamed. He was excited because the king's words opened a new window for him. His vision was broadened, and he came to a new vast world. He was ashamed because, as the chief strategist of the dynasty and the Palm Seal Grand Scholar of the Advisor Pavilion, he didn't take the initiative to discover this problem and let the king worry about it. Rest assured, Your Majesty, I will handle this matter well. Zhang Liang made a military pledge. Ouyang Shuo smiled. I naturally trust Zifeng. In just a day, Ouyang Shuo made some adjustments to the secret text pavilion and the State Affair Research Center. It might seem insignificant, but it would definitely have a decisive impact on the dynasty. Ouyang Shuo was in such a hurry. Of course, there was an objective need, but there was also the fact that Handan City was advancing bravely, which made Ouyang Shuo feel a sense of urgency. There was pressure when there was competition. This saying was absolutely correct. Gaia 5th year, 23rd of May. After he made adjustments to the Secret Literature Pavilion and Management Pavilion, Ouyang Shuo brought along his personal guards to ride the teleportation formation of the royal city at dawn the next day to appear at the Dark Han Dynasty's capital, Luoyang. Ouyang Shuo brought his personal guards to the capital of the dynasty. Ouyang Shuo's trip this time was firstly to pay a friendly visit to the Dark Han Dynasty and consolidate their cooperative relationship. The Yang Shuo was to pay a friendly visit to the dynasty. Especially since Handan City was about to be established, Ouyang Shuo hoped to have a good relationship with the Dark Han Dynasty. The main purpose of Ouyang Shuo's trip was to borrow Luoyang to go to Xinyuan Hill, which was located in the Central Plains province, and ask for the Yellow Emperor's Xinyuan sword. As the Xinyuan sword was an empire artifact, Gaia stipulated that if the leader of a national war wielded the empire artifact, they would automatically be augmented by the country's providence. It was beneficial to the national war. Seeing that the Kingdom War was just around the corner, Ouyang Shuo naturally had to settle this matter. Before this, the Chinese adventurers were still guessing how Ouyang Shuo would obtain the Xinyuan sword, or if he would just give up. After all, the Yellow Emperor had gone into seclusion and refused to see outsiders. Even the Yellow Emperor's tribe was very low-key. Apart from appearing once during the founding of the Xia Kingdom, they had been quiet ever since. In the land of China, the Yellow Emperor had an extraordinary status. Although the Xianyuan Dune was located in the Dark Han dynasty, Emperor Wu of Han did not dare to have any thoughts about it. He only designated the area within 500 miles of the Xianyuan Dune as a forbidden area. If the Yellow Emperor was unwilling, no one would be able to obtain the Xianyuan sword. Even Ouyang Shua didn't have 100% certainty. He just wanted to give it a try and went to the Xianyuan mound to take a look. The next morning, Ouyang Shua and the others left Luoyang and set off for the Xianyuan Dune. When the Luoyang players received the news, they followed. They were either there to watch the commotion or had other intentions. Seeing this, Ouyang Shua could only ask Emperor Wu of Han to arrange a group of imperial guards to accompany him. This place was the Dark Han dynasty, so it wasn't convenient for Ouyang Shua to bring the divine martial guards over so as to avoid causing unnecessary misunderstandings. Seeing that Ouyang Shua was so well-behaved, Emperor Wu of Han naturally reciprocated and arranged for his army to escort Ouyang Shua. If something happened to Ouyang Shua in Great Han's territory, Emperor Wu of Han would also lose face. The group of people left the city in a mighty manner. The Xianyuan Dune was located to the east of Luoyang, roughly between Luoyang and Qin County. Its geographical location was very unique. It was the land of the great wilderness, the land of the middle earth of the 5 elements, and it was also in the middle of the world. The Yellow Emperor was the earth virtue of the 5 elements. Ouyang Shua and his party arrived at Xianyuan Hill at noon. As far as the eye could see, the architectural layout and style were shockingly identical to Yellow Emperor's city in the Zhuolu battle. "Who are you?" the city gate guard asked. Ouyang Shua dismounted from his horse, cupped his fists, and said, "Yin and Huang's descendant, Ouyang Shua, has come to pay a visit in such a holy land." Ouyang Shua didn't dare to be arrogant and called himself an ordinary person. "What brings you here?" the guard continued to ask. Ouyang Shua replied, "I came to ask for the Xianyuan sword." "How dare you?" The guard's expression had already calmed down, but when he heard about the Xianyuan sword, he immediately exploded. As he spoke, a row of archers appeared on the city wall, staring at Ouyang Shua and his party. It was no wonder that the guard was so nervous. Ever since the Yellow Emperor's tribe appeared in the wilderness, the guards at the city gate had lost count of the number of reckless robbers they had encountered in an attempt to seize the Xianyuan sword. "Protect the king." With a swoosh, Su Chu led the personal guards to form a defensive wall with their shields. The atmosphere at the scene suddenly became tense. The accompanying players saw this and said regretfully, "It seems that Emperor Xia's reputation is not very useful. The Yellow Emperor's tribe is really a no-go zone. Everyone will hit a wall." Most of the players still hoped that Ouyang Shua would get the Xianyuan sword. After all, it was all the players who benefited. There were also people who said sourly, "Haha." Ouyang Shua relied on the fact that the Yellow Emperor's tribe had once sent people to Great Xia to congratulate him, so he thought that the Yellow Emperor thought highly of him. He really thought too highly of himself. Now he's embarrassed. When Ouyang Shua arrived at Luoyang, he was personally welcomed by Emperor Wu of Han. When he arrived at Xianyuan Hill, he was protected by the Great Han Imperial Army. The ordinary players were extremely jealous of him. For these Luoyang players, it was difficult for them to even meet Emperor Wu of Han, let alone befriending him. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. They were all players, but when faced with such a disparity, some would naturally feel unbalanced. However, Ouyang Shua did not mind and said to Su Chu, "Don't be rude. This is a sacred place. How can you use weapons? Withdraw." "Yes, sir." Su Chu saw this and did not dare to persist. With a swoosh, he withdrew the shield wall. When the guard saw this, a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. Ouyang Shua cupped his fists again and said, "The war is imminent. As the leader of the war, Ouyang Shua will definitely lead the troops against Dong Ying and raise the prestige of Huaxia. I am borrowing the national weapon, the Xianyuan sword. I will return it immediately after the war ends." When the guard heard that he was borrowing and not robbing, his tone finally softened. "Is this true?" "Absolutely. Hold on, I have to report first." The guard finally relented. After all, as Emperor Xia, Ouyang Shuo was still very influential in front of the NPCs. Half an hour later, the guard returned. His face was still filled with shock. He looked at Ouyang Shuo in astonishment and said, "His Majesty invites you in." Wow. Hearing this, the surrounding players were in an uproar. All of them were dumbfounded. TSK, TSK. As expected of Emperor Xia, his reputation is so great that even the Yellow Emperor made an exception to meet him. This time, we have more confidence in the war. The surrounding players were discussing while Ouyang Shuo followed the guard into Xinyuan Hill. When Su Chu was about to enter with his personal guards, he was stopped by the guard. His Majesty only wants to meet the dissimulated person, Ouyang Shuo. Others are not allowed to enter. You. Su Chu was furious, and his eyes were wide open. We are the Emperor's personal guards. We have to follow the Emperor, Su Chu argued. The guard's attitude was firm. That won't do. Ouyang Shuo saw this and waved his hand, gesturing for Su Chu to leave. Su Chu saw this and glared at the guard again. He said fiercely, "Listen to me. If anything happens to the Emperor, I will lead my troops to raise Xinyuan Hill." The guard was not afraid and walked straight away. After passing through the streets, the guard brought Ouyang Shuo to the front of the palace. The scene was exactly the same as the battle at Zhuolu. After passing through the palace and entering the main hall, Ouyang Shuo finally saw the Yellow Emperor. Compared to the battle at Zhuolu, the Yellow Emperor looked much older. Ouyang Shuo took the initiative to bow. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Dissimulated person, Ouyang Shuo. "I remember you." The Yellow Emperor's voice was a little hoarse. He seemed to be in poor health. "You're not bad. You are worthy of the name of Huaxia." When Ouyang Shuo heard this, he could not help but feel a sense of pride. In the whole world, how many people could be praised by the Yellow Emperor? This was a great honor. Ouyang Shuo is not talented, but I am willing to continue to expand the territory and raise the prestige of Huaxia. Good. The Yellow Emperor seemed very happy. He took the Xinyuan sword from his waist and raised it in front of him with his right hand. "With such ambition, you can wear this sword. Take it." Ouyang Shuo did not dare to be negligent. He slowly stepped forward and raised his hands, respectfully receiving the sword. "You deserve it." The Yellow Emperor was in high spirits. When Ouyang Shuo saw this, he casually put the Xinyuan sword on the right side of his waist. On the left side, he always wore the Scarlet Knight, sword that never left him. No matter how noble the Xinyuan sword was, the Scarlet Knight sword was the symbol of Ouyang Shuo's identity. When the Yellow Emperor saw this, he seemed to be deep in thought. Chapter 1046. By the time Ouyang Shuo returned to Shanghai City, it was already the 24th of May. There was good news as soon as he returned. Over the past 2 days, many Song Dynasty historical talents took the initiative to join Great Xia. Other than Su Zhe's father Su Sun and brother Su Shi, there were also Fan Zhongyin and Ouyang Xiu, the two iconic figures of the Northern Song Dynasty. Among them were Ouyang Xiu's student Sun Gong, Zhang Zai, Bao Zheng, Han Qi, and Sima Guan. At the same time, Yu Fei's family had also arrived at Shanghai City, including his famous mother-in-law Lady Yao, his son Yu Yun, and his daughter Yu Yinping. In addition, Zhang Xian, Fu Xian, Niu Gao, Su Qing, and other generals of the Yu family also joined. For a time, Shanghai City was very lively. There were only 3 lords left in the wilderness, and there were not many choices for historical talents. No matter how one looked at it, Great Xia was the best choice. The foundation that Great Xia had accumulated over the years had finally exploded with astonishing power. During this period of time, not only the historical talents of the Song dynasty, but even the historical talents of the Han and Tang dynasties had their eyes on Great Xia. In the following period of time, Great Xia would usher in the best era. High-level talents would emerge like a geyser and flow into Great Xia like a river. It had been a year and a month since the establishment of Great Xia. Ever since Shanghai City was promoted to the capital city, it had expanded its territory and increased its population by 30 million in just a year. This did not include the millions of players who chose to settle in Great Xia. According to the latest statistics from the Civil Affairs Bureau, the total population of Great Xia had reached 65 million, and it would break the 100 million mark by this time next year. The demographic dividend was gradually appearing, and the desolate counties were gradually becoming prosperous. Great Xia had established education, medical, infrastructure, and industrial systems early on, and they were continuously providing talents and energy to the local areas, changing with each passing day. This was the only word that could accurately describe the rapid development of Great Xia. The larger the size and the faster the development, there would naturally be some new problems, which put a higher demand on the governance system of the dynasty and the governance ability of the county yamen. It was a big problem to control such a vast territory. Because of this, Ouyang Shua decided to set up the State Affairs Research Center in the Cabinet of Advisors. It was precisely at this point in time that Ouyang Shua's thirst for high-end talents was so that he could rely on these talents to assist the imperial court in governing the vast territory of Great Xia so that it wouldn't deviate from its course. Among the talents who submitted, other than Bao Zheng, who was appointed as the head of the inspectorate, Su Sun, Su Shi, Sima Guang, Zhang Gong, and Han Qi were all appointed as prefectural governors and sent to various provinces. Su Sun was appointed as Shu Province's Jianyang County Chief. Su Shi was appointed as North Chuan Province's Tongren County Chief. Han Qi was appointed as Xiangnan Province's Changsha County Chief. Sima Guang was appointed as Jiangchuan Province's Jiujiang County Chief. Zheng Gong was appointed as Jiangchuan Province's Ningdu County Chief. They were all vital prefectures. In this way, the shortcomings discovered by the Bureau of Personnel before the new year were basically fixed. At the same time, Yin, Zhang Xian, Fu Xian, Niu Gao, and Su Qing, the 5 generals of the Yu Clan army, were also arranged to take up posts in various armies, all of them taking up the positions of division commanders. If he did not comply, he would be immediately expelled from Great Xia. Ouyang Shua didn't want the Yu Clan's army to exist in the Great Xia army. It was worth mentioning that valiant General Yu Yun was specially arranged by Ouyang Shua to hold a post in the 4th Imperial Guard Corps. Obviously, Ouyang Shua was very optimistic about this young general and hoped that Yu Yun would be able to take charge of an area in the future like Luo Shixin. In Great Xia, Yu Yun still had a lot of room for growth. On New Year's Eve in the year 1142, Yu Fei was killed in the Supreme Court prison at the age of 39. Yu Yun and Zhang Xian were beheaded together. At that time, Yu Yun was only 23 years old. It was really a pity. Another day passed in the midst of busyness. At around 5 in the afternoon, when it was almost time for dinner, Ouyang Shua finally had time to meet someone in the imperial study. It was Feng Qingwei, who had just been transferred to the secret text pavilion from the Shu province. Now, Ouyang Shua felt that it was necessary to have a showdown with Feng Qingwei. Seeing that Feng Qingwei was a little vigilant, Ouyang Shua said with a smile. Seeing this, Feng Qingwei nodded his head and sat at the side, his eyes full of curiosity. Ordinary players might not know that when Feng Qingwei was officially transferred to the secret text pavilion in Great Xia, it set off a storm within the 6 big clans. Although at the end of the Battle of Swordsman City, the Feng clan and the Yin Huang alliance gradually drifted apart, the higher-ups of the 2 clans still maintained close contact. The Feng clan had never left this circle. Even if they were not members of the Yin Huang alliance, they were still important members of the Silver Hand. When they found out that Feng Qingwei took the initiative to go to Shanghai City, the Silver Hand had already secretly warned the Feng clan with the help of the Yin Huang alliance, but the Feng clan managed to evade it. Fortunately, at that time, Feng Qingwei did not gain Ouyang Shua's trust and only had a nominal position in the Shu province of Great Xia. No one thought that Feng Qingwei could really make a name for himself, and after a long time, it was left unsettled. This time, when Feng Qingwei was suddenly transferred to the secret text pavilion in Great Xia, the Silver Hand became really vigilant. Although the Silver Hand did not know much about the specific operation of the secret text pavilion in Great Xia, the secret text pavilion was the center of Great Xia, and people who were not trusted by Ouyang Shuo were not allowed to enter. The meaning behind Feng Qingwei being transferred to the secret text pavilion was too worth pondering. The subconscious reaction of the Silver Hand was that this was not a tacit understanding between Feng Qingwei and Ouyang Shuo, but the entire Feng clan was making a deal with Ouyang Shuo. If they thought deeper, would the Feng clan betray the Silver Hand and turn a Great Xia? It was no wonder that the Silver Hand was so nervous. Great Xia had repeatedly brought surprises to the Silver Hand, giving them quite a headache. Although they wanted to teach Great Xia a lesson, they had no way to do so. Of course, the upcoming national war might be an opportunity. The significance of Feng Qingwei gaining Ouyang Shuo's trust was far greater than its practical significance, because it meant that the tentacles of Great Xia had begun to extend into the Silver Hand, which was definitely a taboo. Once such a gap was opened, no one could predict what kind of stormy waves would evolve into in the future. There was another point that made the Silver Hand nervous. The Great Xia, led by Ouyang Shuo, seemed to have a naturally strong tolerance and could accommodate all the talents in the world. They were worried that once they allowed this tentacle to extend into the Silver Hand, it would trigger a bigger chain reaction. A 1,000-mile dike would often collapse because of an ant's nest. Realizing the seriousness of the problem, number 2 of the Silver Hand, who was also Di Qin's grandfather, personally went to Chengdu and had a secret conversation with Feng Qingyue's grandfather. Outsiders naturally did not know the specific content of the conversation. However, a disciple of the Feng clan revealed that number 2 looked a little unhappy when he left the Feng clan's courtyard. Feng Qingwei knew more because her grandfather had specially written a letter to her afterwards. The position of the Feng clan was very clear. All of Feng Qingyue's actions only represent himself, not the position of the Feng clan. Similarly, the Feng clan will never interfere with Feng Qingyue's personal choice and force him to leave Great Xia. Although the words were dignified, the meaning was actually very clear. The Feng clan wanted a bet on both sides. The Silver Hand did not have any binding force on its members, especially for a clan like the Feng clan that had lost its territory. In view of the previous abandonment of the Swordsman City by the Yan-Huang Alliance, the Feng clan's words were even more justified. Feng Qingyue's pair of bright eyes looked deeply at Ouyang Shuo, who was sitting above, and her heart was filled with emotion. How old is he? Not only did he single-handedly create the largest empire in the game world, but his means are also feared by the elders who have played tricks for their entire lives. It's really unbelievable that he can arm wrestle with them. Perhaps even Ouyang Shuo himself did not realize how much he had changed over the years. Not to mention in Great Xia. Even outside of Great Xia, the attitude of the guild leaders towards Ouyang Shuo had also quietly changed. While they treated Ouyang Shuo as equals, there was a faint trace of respect and even awe in them. Even on the forums, those who dared to point out Ouyang Shuo's name and scold him had basically disappeared. The haters were not as unbridled as they were 2 years ago because Ouyang Shuo supporters were everywhere. In the entire Chinese player community, Ouyang Shuo had already established an unshakable position. Not to mention the subjective recognition or worship, just based on their own interests. There were tens of millions of players who were entangled with Great Xia. It was precisely this complicated relationship of interests that protected Ouyang Shuo's position. Although Ouyang Shuo had the advantage of being reborn to be able to reach where he was today, it would be too narrow-minded and biased to only attribute all of this to his rebirth. If it was someone else, even if he was reborn, he might not be able to reach where he was today. There were simply too many traps and temptations on the road to hegemony. In the Chinese region alone, the number of heroes who had fallen was uncountable. For Ouyang Shuo to be able to break through all of them, it proved that he had some kind of innate talent that helped him overcome all the obstacles. In his previous life, it was only because there was no stage for him to display his talents. In this life, he was a hidden dragon that soared into the abyss. Once he encountered a storm, he would skyrocket and be unstoppable. Don't be burdened by your identity in the secret text pavilion. Just do what you need to do. I'm also looking forward to the changes you can bring to the secret text pavilion. If you can produce results, it is not impossible for you to be promoted to a scholar. Ouyang Shua's words interrupted Feng Qingyue's deep thoughts. Understood. As one of the 3 female scholars in China, Qingyu was the palm seal scholar of the secret text pavilion while she was only a secretary. It was impossible to say that she did not care about it. Feng Qingyue was also suppressing a wave of energy in her heart. As for your family, Ouyang Shua paused for a moment. Feng Qingyue's heart was in her throat. Ouyang Shua's attitude not only concerned her personal future, but also the fate of her entire family. Help me pass on a message to your grandfather. A fine bird chooses a good tree to nest in. Great Xia will always welcome people from all over the world. Just one thing, Great Xia does not need indecisive people and will not wait for long. I hope that you can make a decision soon. Following which, Ouyang Shua gave an exact time limit. If Great Xia really takes down Chengdu, you will no longer need to make a decision. Understood. Feng Qingyue nodded her head again with a grave expression. Chapter 10:47. After having a showdown with Feng Qingyue, Ouyang Shua ended his busy day. Inside the everlasting palace, the newborn Yu and Luo were sleeping soundly. Perhaps it was because they had signed a contract with the divine beast, but the 2 of them were even more sleepy than the average baby. Other than drinking milk, they spent most of their time sleeping. The 2 children's daily diet consisted of breast milk and diluted 10,000-year-old stalactite. Under medical sage Zhongjing's supervision, they began tempering their bodies the moment they were born. By the time they reached the age of cultivation, their progress would probably be tremendous. Song Jia sat by the cradle and was focused on knitting a sweater. Ever since Yu and Luo were born, Song Jia had devoted all her attention to her children. She did not even bother with the corporation's matters. Looking at the loving mother in front of her, who would have thought that she was the former sect master of the Eastern Hedgesword sect, the Pope of Entertainment, the chairman of the Mountain Sea Entertainment Holdings Corporation, and a true influential figure in the wilderness. When Ouyang Shua saw this, he said with a smile, "When you and Luo are 1 month old, Madam should leave them to the nanny to take care of. It's boring to stay in the palace all day. It's hard on Madam." Song Jia shook her head. "Let's wait until after their first birthday." Song Jia did not feel bored while accompanying the 2 children. She enjoyed the rare moment of peace. When Ouyang Shua saw this, he did not say anything else. Looking at the pair of adorable children in swaddling clothes, Ouyang Shua felt extremely satisfied and filled with fighting spirit. Unfortunately, the 2 children's 1-month-old coincided with the war, so Ouyang Shua could not accompany them. An uneventful night passed. On the 25th day of the 5th year of Gaia, 9 in the morning, a system announcement spread across the world. World announcement. There are 5 days left to the first month of war. The national borders will be officially unlocked. The leaders of the war have to choose a war target within 2 days, or it will be considered as forfeiting. The moment the announcement was made, the entire world's players rubbed their fists. The curtains to the month of war that attracted the attention of the world had finally begun. According to Gaia's rules, the choice of a war target was one-sided. For example, Country A could directly declare war on Country B without the consent of Country B. When Country A declared war on Country B, it could also declare war on Country C. It could even be said that multiple countries could declare war on the same country. Of course, Gaia had its limits. It could not exceed 3 countries at most to declare war on the same country. Such a rule would bring more uncertainty to the Kingdom War. Taking Country A as an example, while declaring war on Country B, Country A might also have to guard against attacks from Country C, Country D, and other countries. Some small countries that had a tacit understanding could adopt wolfpack tactics and destroy a medium-sized country. This was also the reason why Gaia requested the Kingdom War leaders to choose their Kingdom War targets within 2 days. It was to give the various kingdoms 3 days to prepare after confirming their opponents. The month of the Nation War would be a global reshuffle. Unlike the struggle for supremacy in the wilderness, this time, it was a contest between nations. The regional overlord might use this opportunity to clear out the surrounding small countries, and the surrounding small countries might also attack together and kill the regional overlord. No one knew who would win or lose. This huge uncertainty, along with the conflict of interests, as well as the strong sense of mission and honor, were all mixed together. This was destined to be the most exciting war of the century in the world. Players from all over the world would be drawn in. At the same time, to prevent the feudal lords who participated in the Kingdom War from having any worries, Gaius stipulated that during the Kingdom War, not only were internal wars prohibited, but wars between undeclared warring states were also prohibited. To put it bluntly, the enemies in the month of the nation war could only be those who declared war. Instantly, the world was in turmoil. 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 25th, Shanghai City. Ouyang Shua gathered the two feudal lords, Di Chun and Feng Xiuhuang, as well as the leaders of the 14 satellite cities guardian guilds in the name of China's regional war leader. There were 14 satellite cities in the Huaxia region, including 9 capital cities, 2 capital cities, and 3 satellite cities that Great Xia had conquered overseas. The 14 satellite cities and 14 super guilds basically represented the adventure players in China. Among them, there were 8 guilds that Ouyang Shua had shares in. They included the Baleful Blood Mercenary Group, the Snow Death Rose Mercenary Group, the Flowing Light Pavilion, and the Fallen Leaf Alliance. The Blood Shadow Alliance, the Mountain and Country Alliance, the Purple Moon Alliance, and the Southern Sky Alliance were the guardian guilds of the satellite cities controlled by Great Xia. The remaining 5 royal cities guilds, the Crisscrossing Sword Chi, the 18 Steeds of Swallow and Cloud, the Embroidered Uniform Guards, the Tingyu Tower, and the Laojun Temple, as well as the Purple Lightning Alliance, the newly added satellite cities guardian guilds of Handan City, were controlled by Handan City. From this, it could be seen that the entire China region was clearly divided into 2 camps. Although the Shanghai Alliance, led by Ouyang Shua, had the upper hand, it was unable to obtain an overwhelming advantage. Di Chun still had a considerable say in how the Kingdom War was fought. The 17 top existences in China discussed for an entire afternoon and finally decided on the basic principles of the Kingdom War. There is no need to mention the target of the Kingdom War. After confirming that it was Japan, Ouyang Shua immediately made a choice on his personal interface. As soon as he made his choice, a system announcement spread across the entire China region. System announcement. The leader of the China region's Kingdom War has chosen the Japan region as the target, effective immediately. All players of the China region, please prepare for the Kingdom War. As soon as the announcement was made, the world was naturally in jubilation. The players of the China region had been attacking the heart of Japan for a long time and had been waiting for this moment. At the same time, the leader of the Japan region's Kingdom War, Keisuke Honda, also received a system notification. The players of the Japan region received the news as soon as possible and started their final preparations. An unprecedented decisive battle was about to begin. Apart from the goal of the Kingdom War, the most important thing was to determine the gathering point, the marching route, and the division of tasks. The truth was right in front of them. It was impossible for Di Chun to obediently cooperate with Ouyang Shua's commands. The hatred between the two parties was so deep that it was destined that they wouldn't be able to trust each other. It was just like the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. The best method was for the two camps to each choose a route of attack and proceed with the Kingdom War on their own. Japan was an island country that was made up of Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu islands, as well as over 7,000 small islands. It was a long and narrow strip. The capital, Edo, was garrisoned with 1 million imperial guards, and it was located in the middle. After some discussion, Di Chun would lead the Handan City's army and disembark from Kyushu. They would head north and clear out Shikoku before landing on Honshu. The Mountain and Sea Alliance's army, led by Ouyang Shua, would take a detour and disembark from the northernmost Hokkaido before heading south to attack Honshu. The two armies would meet at Edo, the capital of Japan, and launched the final attack together. Because Japan was an island country, they would have to travel by boat. Considering the problem of teleportation, Great Xia set up 4 gathering points along the coast. They were Beihai Port in Beihai City, Nanshan Port in Cliff Mountain City, Jiaozhou Port in Jinhai City, and Binhai Port in Fengtian County in Northland Province. Apart from that, Ouyang Shua was also preparing to negotiate with the Great Sui Court to open up the Quanzhou Port as well. Handan City would open up 3 ports: Haijin Port in Jingdu Province, Xincheng Port in Donghai Province, and Zhoushan Port in Jiangnan Province. All adventurers from Huaxia who wanted to participate in the national war could gather at any of the ports based on their preferences from the 25th onwards. At that time, Great Xia and Handan City would be responsible for the transportation of goods by sea. Because the 2 armies would be moving separately, whoever could get more unaffiliated players would have an easier time. Therefore, Di Chun and Ouyang Shua both chose to waive all expenses. Just this alone would be a huge expense for the 2 territories. According to Ouyang Shua's predictions, the biggest difference between the national war and normal national wars would be the polarization on the battlefield. In order to prevent the command system from failing, the best way was to use the territory armies to fight against the territory armies, and the adventurers to fight against the adventurers. It would be unwise to mix the 2 armies, or else they would be wasting twice the effort. There were 10 million adventurers in the Japanese region, and they were a force that couldn't be ignored. After the discussion, Ouyang Shua announced the arrangements for the national war on the forum that night, so that the players in the Huaxia region could refer to them and prepare in advance. Ouyang Shua didn't think of keeping it a secret from the Japanese. Firstly, he couldn't protect it, and secondly, there was no need for him to do so. 26th of May, the Xia Palace. After dealing with the overall situation, Ouyang Shua gathered the members of the Grand Council to discuss Great Xia's plans. Without a doubt, Great Xia's army would be the cornerstone of the national war, so they had to plan carefully and choose the most suitable army. First was the Navy. The Royal Fleet, the Cliff Mountain Fleet, the Atlantic Fleet, and the Coastal Fleet were all on the list. One could imagine that the most difficult part of the national war would be the problem of landing. Only by establishing a stable base on the island would they be able to continuously send troops ashore. Otherwise, there would be no discussion. The Japanese players knew this, and they would stop the Chinese expeditionary army from landing at all costs. The competition between the 2 sides would start with the Navy. This was why Ouyang Shua decided to send out the most luxurious naval fleet in history. The size of the fleet would be more than twice that of the Annan Kingdom, and it would set a new record. Next was the land forces: Imperial Guards, City Guards, Dragon Stallion Army, and Tiger Army. Various armies and trump card troops flashed before Ouyang Shua's eyes. It was a big problem, and it was quite nerve-wracking. At this moment, a system announcement sounded out in Ouyang Shua's ears. Ouyang Shua was dumbfounded. The sudden change had completely disrupted Ouyang Shua's plans. An unforeseen storm was approaching Great Xia like a violent storm, catching Ouyang Shua off guard. Ouyang Shua took a deep breath and stared at the map in the Grand Council with a cold glint in his eyes. Du Ruhui and the other officials from the Grand Council saw that their king had suddenly shut up and was staring at the map with a grave expression. They realized that something big had happened, and they all looked at each other in dismay. They didn't dare to interrupt their king's train of thought. 46. Chapter 1048. Ouyang Shua did not expect that someone would dare to touch China's dragon whiskers. Just now, Ouyang Shua received 3 system notifications. Goryeo, South Palm, and Shinla had simultaneously declared war on China. Ouyang Shua smelled a conspiracy. It was too obvious. South Palm and Shinla, the 2 ASEAN countries, shared a large border with Great Xia's Annan Province. They could only attack China from the Annan Province. What about Goryeo? It seemed like they were provoked by Japan, but in fact, they shared a border with Great Xia's Beijiang Province. The 3 countries were like 3 sharp knives that pierced Great Xia's abdomen. If not for Gaia's rule that only 3 countries could launch a war against the same country, there would be more challengers. For example, the African continent would never be as peaceful as it was now. It was obvious that the mastermind was the Silver Hand. Other than this super organization, no one else had the power to coordinate the actions of the various countries. The Grand Council. Ouyang Shuo retracted his gaze from the map and said, "Everyone, we are in trouble." The most troublesome of the three countries was Goryeo. Firstly, Goryeo shared a border with the Beijiang province, and the Goryeo army could attack directly from the land. Secondly, Goryeo had a total of 7 million players, which was on the same level as Japan and Annan. If Chenla and Southern Palm could be said to be minor ailments, then Goryeo would be a major problem. "Your Majesty, what do you mean?" Duruhui asked. Ouyang Shuo's gaze was firm. "This is the enemy's first wave of attack. We must not retreat. Not only must we not retreat, but we must also counterattack so that they will go for wool and come home shorn. Let this battle be the prelude to the confrontation between Great Xia and the Silver Hand." Ouyang Shuo finally made up his mind to face the Silver Hand head-on. Perhaps, deep in his heart, Ouyang Shuo had been waiting for this day to come. The current Great Xia had the confidence to deal with any provocation. When Bai Qi, Hua, Xubing, Zheng He, and the rest heard this, they felt their blood boil and clenched their fists. Ouyang Shuo decided to split the Great Xia army into three relatively independent groups. Shinla and South Palm were the first group, and Bai Qi was in charge of the Southwest War Zone. It was reported that there were a total of 2 million Jinla players and 600,000 Southern Palm players. The Forbidden Army of the two countries added together was only 180,000, and even the Territory Army would not exceed 300,000. In the Southwest War Zone, the Blind Dragon Stallion Army and the Annan Corps had a total of 8 field legions, totaling 560,000 soldiers. With Bai Qi in command, it should be more than enough to deal with a pincer attack from the two countries. The Indian Ocean Fleet, led by Smoke and Fire, was in charge of providing reinforcements at sea. The order that Ouyang Shuo gave Bai Qi was to seize the opportunity to annex the two countries. As for the confrontation between the adventure players, Ouyang Shuo planned to leave it to the Southern Sky Alliance, which was guarding the satellite cities in Hanoi. Similar to the Rivers and Mountains Alliance in Morocco and the Purple Moon Alliance in Somalia, this Southern Sky Alliance, led by the cute little hero, was also a combined guild with a total of 300,000 members. In addition to the other Huaxia region adventurers who were stationed in the satellite cities and the Tranquil South province, it would be enough. Goryeo was the second group. In the face of this troublesome opponent, apart from the northern borderline army led by Chun Yuqing, Ouyang Shuo was also prepared to mobilize the Flying Bear Army, led by Li Jing, and the Imperial Guards led by Hua, Xubing to the north as reinforcements. In order to fight against Goryeo, Ouyang Shuo played his strongest trump card. Ouyang Shuo naturally had his reasons for doing so. If there was any difference between the Battle of Japan and the Battle of Goryeo, the Battle of Japan was an all-out war between nations, while the Battle of Goryeo was a contest between Great Xia and Goryeo. Just this point alone was enough for Ouyang Shuo to make up his mind to send the strongest Imperial Guards into the Battle of Goryeo. Moreover, Japan was mainly mountainous and was an island country, which was not suitable for the Imperial Guards. Two combined armies, 10 field legions, and 700,000 soldiers would cost one. For a million gold coins just to teleport back and forth. This time, Ouyang Shuo was going all out. The second group of reinforcements at sea was naturally the responsibility of the coastal fleet, led by Qi Jiguang. As for the adventure players, Ouyang Shuo planned to mobilize the Blood Shadow Alliance that guarded the satellite cities in Shanghai City, the Rivers and Mountains Alliance that guarded Morocco, and the Purple Moon Alliance that guarded Somalia. Together with the Flowing Light Pavilion, there would be a total of 4 super guilds. Apart from that, Ouyang Shuo also planned to mobilize the Chinese players to actively participate in the battle against Goryeo. Although the Silver Hand wanted to scam Great Xia, this was a war after all. Ouyang Shuo should not be the only one fighting. With Ouyang Shuo's prestige in the Chinese region, there was no problem. The commander of the second group of Allied forces was designated by Ouyang Shua as the commander of the Flying Bear Army, Li Jing. Without a doubt, this was the moment for Great Tang's god of war, Li Jing, to prove himself. Whether or not he could live up to the title of commander-in-chief that Ouyang Shua had bestowed upon him would depend on the Battle of Goryeo. The last group was naturally Japan. Due to the influence of the Three Kingdoms Challenge, the expeditionary army that Great Xia sent to Japan would be greatly reduced. There was no need to mention the Navy. Without the coastal fleet as reinforcements, there was still the Royal Fleet, Cliff Mountain Fleet, and the Atlantic Fleet. As for the land army, the Soaring Eagle Army, the Stalwart Tiger Army, and the City Guard had to stay behind to defend their homeland. The only army that could really go to war was the Leopard Army, led by Han Xian. The Soaring Eagle Army guarded the west, the Stalwart Tiger Army guarded the east, and the City Guards guarded the headquarters. Although Gaia had stipulated that all internal conflicts were prohibited during the war, Gaia's ban was only limited to the 1 month of the war. Once the expeditionary army was unable to return to the country on time, it would be troublesome. Therefore, even if it was a three-front war, Ouyang Shua had to leave behind troops to defend his homeland. At most, he could only transfer one army from the Soaring Eagle Army, the Stalwart Tiger Army, and the City Guards. As for the Morocco Army, the Somali Army, and the Auckland Army, they only had 100,000 soldiers. Even if they were transferred, it was better than nothing, so it was better not to go through the trouble. It was worth mentioning that the Auckland region had already submitted to Great Xia, so it was no longer a separate war zone. It avoided a disaster. It had to be said that in the ASEAN region alone, Java had already set its sights on East Timor, while Johor had set its sights on Nigeria. It had to be said that in the ASEAN region alone, Java had already set its sights on East Timor, while Johor had set its sights on Nigeria. If it wasn't for the quota limit and the fact that they didn't share a border with Great Xia, Luzon would have chosen to start a war with Huaxia. Unfortunately, New Zealand couldn't be the target of the war, so Luzon was destined to miss out on this war. Apart from that, in the Asian continent, India had set its sights on the Bamboo region in the north instead of Ceylon across the sea. It could be said that India wanted to resolve the hidden dangers on the mainland first before turning back to deal with Ceylon. Without a doubt, this would be the most difficult war that Great Xia would face. For this war, Great Xia had mobilized almost all the troops on land and sea within its borders. The troops involved exceeded 3 million, and the players involved, including the logistics, exceeded 10 million. The adventurers who went to Japan were naturally led by the 3 super guilds, Baleful Blood Mercenary Group, Snow Morning Rose Mercenary Group, and Fallen Leaf Alliance. Apart from that, Thread provided logistical support for the adventurers throughout the journey. Among the 3 major groups, the Japanese had the weakest land troops. Fortunately, Great Xia wasn't alone this time. The Blazing Flame Legion of Fallen Phoenix City would go with the Great Xia army to conquer the northern region of Japan. In an instant, the Japanese army once again became the most powerful force. Just the land army alone numbered 910,000. During the meeting yesterday, Feng Xiaohuang had already made it clear that the Blazing Flame Legion would obey the unified command of Great Xia. Therefore, Ouyang Shua needed to designate a commander for the Japanese expeditionary force. Without any hesitation, Ouyang Shua decided on Han Xian. Bai Qi, Li Jing, and Han Xian could be said to be the 3 most well-rounded immortal generals in the Great Xia army. They were also Ouyang Shua's most trusted commanders. Every time there was a war, one of them would definitely appear on the stage. This was also why Ouyang Shua decided to let Sun Bin lead the Brave Tiger Army to defend his home instead of the Leopard Army. After deciding on the strategy for the war, Ouyang Shua stopped at that. The specific battle strategy, troops, rations, supplies, and warships would naturally be jointly handled by the Grand Council, the Privy Council, and the 3 commanders Bai Li and Han. Everyone had their own specialties, and Ouyang Shua couldn't handle a 1,000,000-strong army. Furthermore, Ouyang Shua had other things to do. That afternoon, Ouyang Shua posted a message on the forum. I received a notification from the system. Goryeo, South Palm, and Chinla have declared war on us." Once the news came out, the world was in an uproar. After the Chinese players were shocked, they couldn't contain their indignation. Just like what Ouyang Shua had thought, as the strongest region in the gaming world, the Chinese players subconsciously believed that China could only attack others and had no reason to be attacked. Who would have thought that Chinla, South Palm, and Goryeo would be so reckless? For a moment, the crowd was stirred up, and requests for war could be heard incessantly. It had to be said that in this aspect, the Chinese players were very unyielding. Even if it was a 1v4 battle, they weren't afraid at all. In addition to the support of 100 million players, they also had Great Xia. Naturally, Ouyang Shua couldn't say much on the forum, but the External Information Office, led by Violet Roland, the Deputy Minister of the Chamberlain of Dependencies, quickly took action and summoned the wind and rain on the forum. On one hand, Violet Roland declared Great Xia's determination and boldness to resist the foreign enemies. He timely disclosed the distribution plan of the 3 armies of Great Xia to appease the hearts of the Chinese players. Following which, the External Information Office changed the tone and guided the Chinese players to resist the foreign enemies together with Great Xia. Relying on the previous promises, the Chinese players' favorable impression of Great Xia was simply exploding. They couldn't wait to throw themselves into the war and follow in Great Xia's footsteps. Of course, this was only the atmosphere on the forum and didn't represent the real situation. This was a matter of life and death. Every adventurer, especially the frontline combat professional players, would be extremely cautious when making a choice. This was understandable. Ouyang Shua didn't place all his hopes on the casual players. The main force of adventurer players was still the elite teams of the super guilds. Because of this, Ouyang Shua began to meet the leaders of the 8 guilds that held shares in the war. He explained to them clearly about Great Xia's strategy for the war and hoped that they would cooperate. How to convince them was a test of Ouyang Shua's wisdom. 46. Chapter 1049. Japan Mikasa City. After confirming the Great Xia Kingdom's arrangements, Keisuke Honda let out a long breath of relief. Ever since Gaia released the expansion pack, Imperial Expedition, at the beginning of the year, all the Japanese players, including Keisuke Honda, had been in an extremely repressive atmosphere. The powerful Huaxia was like a boundless dark cloud looming over Dongying. In order to save his country, Keisuke Honda started to take action. He knew that it was impossible for Japan to stop China, and he could only win with the help of external forces. The greatest help was naturally the Silver Hand. Although the status of the Honda family in the Silver Hand was not as high as that of the D family, it was also one of the core members. Besides, there are also people in the organization who did not want to see Xia Kingdom becoming too powerful, so naturally, they hit it off. In the beginning, the Honda clan had pinned their hopes on Di Chun, hoping that Di Chun would be able to become the leader of the Chinese Kingdom War. If that was the case, all their problems would be solved. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Di Chun was defeated by Ouyang Shua. Seeing that the Kingdom War was inevitable, Keisuke Honda wanted to find an enemy for China to reduce the pressure on Japan's defense. Thus, Korea, which shared a border with Great Xia, became Japan's first ally. Park Sung-ki, the Lord of Ulsan City in Goryeo, naturally understood the principle of interdependence. If Goryeo watches the Japanese be destroyed this year, Goryeo will face the same fate as the Japanese next year. In addition to Korea, Keisuke Honda originally wanted to look for Luzon, Java, and India, which had large populations. However, due to various reasons, he was unable to make the trip. First, Java and India were too far away from Huaxia. Second, their territories had not been completely pacified yet. They wanted to eliminate the surrounding small countries first, so naturally, they were unwilling to get involved in this mess. The Luzon Kingdom was interested, but there were different opinions in the country, so they could only give up in the end. Left with no other choice, the Honda family could only settle for the next best thing, finding the 2 scapegoats, Shinla and Nanzhong. There was a reason to call him a scapegoat. The players from both nations knew that after Great Xia conquered Annan, Their next step would be to annihilate them. However, the players had the mentality of an ostrich. They were unwilling and didn't dare to take the initiative to attack Great Xia. Every day that he could drag on was one day, and every day that he could muddle along was one day. The Honda clan immediately used their killing move and bribed the leaders of the Kingdom War by Wenlai and Langong. They didn't care about the objections of the players in the country and immediately set the Kingdom War on China. At this time, the two of them were probably living in an abyss of suffering. However, they probably wouldn't mind. In order to win over the two of them, the Honda family had put in a lot of effort. Even if the two countries were destroyed in the end, Bai Wenlai and Langong would still be able to live freely on Hope Planet. But this is still not enough. The three kingdoms had indeed taken some of the pressure off the Japanese, but the Huaxia region was simply too powerful. Even if they only used 30% of their strength, it was enough to destroy the Japanese. Now, let's see what he will choose. Keisuke Honda looked at the Lin Kingdom, which was only a sea away. His mind was uncertain and his expression flickered. May 27th, Shanghai City. From today onwards, the various Kingdom War expeditionary armies would set off one after another. If one were to count the time spent on the journey, it could be said that the month of the Kingdom War had officially begun. The most convenient one was the southwest war zone of Great Xia. The commander of the Dragon Stallion Army, Bai Qi, had already returned to the Annan province. With the cooperation of the Privy Council, the War Preparation Department, and the Annan Governor's Office, he transported the rations and supplies that the War Preparation Department had stored in various places to the front lines. At the same time, Bai Qi had to formulate a marching plan. Yesterday afternoon, Huitzubing had already led the Imperial Guards to Hardstone City through the teleportation formation and moved towards the border between North Borderline Province and Goryeo. The Flying Bear Army, led by Li Jing, had to be delayed by 2 days due to the difficulty of assembling them. The governor of North Borderline, Lao Ai, had already received Ouyang Shua's order to ensure the logistics of the expeditionary army. Ouyang Shua pursued the strategy of resisting the enemy outside the country and was unwilling to bring the flames of war into North Borderline Province. Since Goryeo dared to declare war, they had to be prepared for destruction. There was a reason why he was so confident. Yesterday afternoon, the Great Qin Dynasty, the Great Han Dynasty, and the Great Tang Dynasty had sent envoys to report that as long as the Kingdom War began, the three dynasties would each send 150,000 Imperial Guards to Great Xia's North Borderline Province to assist in the defense of Great Xia. This way, Great Xia would have no worries, and the 840,000 soldiers led by Li Jing would be able to directly cross the border and kill their way into Goryeo. Ouyang Shua was more and more confident about the Kingdom War. Because it was an attack, the 9 royal cities of Huaxia, with a total of 10 million Imperial Guards, were unable to follow the army overseas. It was a pity, but even so, they could still assist in the defense of the country. These 10 million Imperial Guards were the stabilizing force of the Huaxia region. No matter how the Kingdom War turned out, they could at least protect Huaxia. This was also one of the reasons why the surrounding countries were afraid of Huaxia. The 10 million Imperial Guards, as well as heroes like Qin Huang, Song Zhu of the Tang sect, and peerless generals like Wang Jian, Wei Qing, and Li Ji, made people despair. The strength of the Huaxia region was not limited to Great Xia. This was also the reason why Luzon finally gave up on attacking Huaxia. As for the adventurer players, the elite groups of the Blood Shadow Alliance, Rivers and Mountains Alliance, Purple Moon Alliance, and Flowing Light Pavilion were already gathering at Hardstone City. Apart from the 4 super guilds, there were also a large number of unaffiliated players gathering at North Borderline Province. The total number of players exceeded the sum of the 4 super guilds and was enough to fight against the combat professional adventurer players of Goryeo. There were 3 reasons why the adventure players were so enthusiastic. Firstly, the external publicity department of the Chamberlain of Dependencies had done a good job in spreading the news. Violet constantly arranged for people to start wave after wave of discussions on the forums, arousing the adventurer players' passion for the nation war and throwing themselves into this war. Secondly, the role model of the Qin, Han, and Tang dynasties. These three dynasties held an unshakable position in the hearts of the Huaxia region players and had a large number of fans. Xianyang, Chang, and Luoyang were also the three royal cities with the most adventure players. The fact that the three dynasties had taken the initiative to send the imperial guards to assist in the defense of Great Xia was an obvious indicator. As soon as the news spread, countless adventurer players rushed to North Borderline Province. Thirdly, everyone had their own preferences. Although the Japanese were the most hostile to the Huaxia region players, there were also many players in Huaxia who were not interested in Goryeo. When these people found out that Great Xia's General Li Jing was going to lead his troops to attack Goryeo, they were naturally eager to sign up. All of these factors determined that the scale of victory in the Kingdom War was already tilting towards Great Xia. The final outcome of this war and the price that Great Xia would have to pay would depend on the god of war, Li Jing. Apart from these two groups, the Japanese group also started to take action. Needless to say, no matter how much the battle in Goryeo attracted the attention of the players, and no matter what unforeseen events happened, the Battle of Japan was still the most anticipated one. It was also the battle with the highest participation of adventurer players. As they were separated by the ocean, the first batch of expeditionary troops was going to set off today. Beihai Port. Early in the morning, Ouyang Shuo led the civil and military officials to the port to send off the expeditionary troops. The Grand Council of Great Xia had divided the Battle of Japan into 4 stages, which are the naval battle, the landing battle, the sweeping battle, and the final battle at the royal city. As the name suggested, the naval battle was a battle between the two navies. The Japanese had always had the bad habit of plundering the coast of Huaxia. Hence, they had rich experience in sailing and naval battles. Coupled with the shipbuilding and firearms technology provided by the United States, they had nurtured a powerful navy. If they didn't annihilate the Japanese navy, they wouldn't be able to talk about the landing battle. The Pacific Fleet led by Shi Lang was responsible for this important task for Great Xia. As for the Cliff Mountain Fleet led by Udayo, they were mainly responsible for escorting and defending the coast between Great Xia and Japan. It was foreseeable that in order to transport a large number of troops, adventurers, and supplies to the battlefield, tens of thousands of merchant ships would be used. Even so, they would probably have to make a few trips back and forth. It was impossible for such a large fleet to not have armed escorts. Furthermore, even though Huaxia was the aggressor, they still had to guard against the Japanese playing dirty and secretly sending a fleet to Great Xia's coast to cause damage. Although it didn't affect the overall situation, it would shake the morale of the army. Given the Japanese's ability to plunder, burn, and kill, it could even cause huge losses. Hence, Ouyang Shuo had to arrange for the Cliff Mountain Fleet to take on the coastal defense to prevent such situations from happening. As for the main battlefield of the Battle of Japan, no matter how strong the Japanese Navy was, they wouldn't be able to get away with a pincer attack from the Pacific Fleet of Great Xia and the Haijiu Fleet of Handan City. A few days ago, with the incorporation of Danyang City, Overlord City, and Blood Red City into Handan City, the entire military structure of Handan City was reconstructed under the leadership of Dichun. The first to make the change was the Navy. Given that the Handan City, Blood Red City, and Overlord City fleets weren't at full strength, the 3 fleets were reorganized into 2 full-strength fleets, namely the Handan Fleet and the Haijiu Fleet. This time, Dichun was going to let the Handan Fleet defend his home while the Haijiu Fleet went on the expedition. As for the land troops, Dichun had also carried out a bold and decisive reorganization. The first one was to follow the model of the Imperial Guards of Xia and form the Royal Guards with Lien Pe as the commander of the Royal Guards. Next, the armies of the various territories, as well as a large number of captives captured by the Yan-Huang Alliance when they conquered Wannan Province in West Chu, were reorganized into 3 full-strength armies, namely the Danyang Army led by Tian Dan, the Overlord Army led by Wu Qi, and the Blood Red Army led by Xie Xian. In this way, Handan City had 4 full-strength armies, a total of 20 field legions, and a total of 1 per million soldiers. In any country other than Huaxia, it would be a well-deserved giant. Back to business. It was the Cliff Mountain Fleet that set off from the North Seaport, accompanied by the 1st Legion of the City Guards and 2 legions of the Flame Army of Luo Feng City, as well as the elite troops of the Baleful Blood Mercenaries. The Cliff Mountain Fleet headed all the way north and would meet the 1st Legion of the Brave Tiger Army along the coast of Minnan Province. These 4 field legions were the first vanguard troops of the expeditionary force of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas, led by Guizi, the commander of the Flame Army. 17,046. Chapter 1050. To adventurer players, the National War was a huge gamble that they could not afford to lose. Unlike Overlord players, who pursued contribution points and territories, adventurer players who participated in the National War would be rewarded with contribution points based on the number of enemies they killed and the contribution they made in the war. Gaia was fair. Just like how overlords could enjoy the bonuses from their territories' armies, guild leaders could also enjoy the bonuses of contribution points from their guild members, allowing them to reap massive amounts of contribution points. Therefore, the National War was not only a matter of personal honor, it was also a contest of strength between the super guilds. What was the use of contribution points? Similar to the battle map, during the National War month, Gaia would also open a National War merchant shop. Adventurer players could use the contribution points they earned to exchange for various items in the merchant shop. After 5 years of observation, Gaia had a thorough understanding of what adventurer players wanted. To adventurer players, regardless of how the game progressed, cultivation technique manuals, weapons and equipment, and skill books were their eternal pursuit. There was no end to it. With dark gold equipment, they would yearn for purple gold equipment, and with purple gold equipment, they would yearn for godly equipment. The higher the mountain, the higher the mountain. The National War Merchant Shop basically had these 3 types of items. Furthermore, they were all rare premium items that made people salivate. With Gaia's cancellation of the auction, such premium equipment was extremely rare. Just this point alone was enough for adventurer players to take the risk. Adventure. Wasn't this what they were born to do? If they won, their equipment would be upgraded and their strength would soar. If they lost, they would be finished. Therefore, it was a gamble with their lives on the line. In particular, the First World Martial Arts Tournament was in full swing, which stimulated the adrenaline of the adventurer players even more. All the players with a fighting profession with a bit of ambition had been gathering at the major gathering points in the past few days. China had 100 million players, and just the combatants alone numbered more than 10 million. According to incomplete statistics, in the following 5 days, more than 3 million combatants would gather at the gathering points in preparation to participate in this unprecedented war. 3 million combatants was equivalent to the total number of players from the 10 super guilds combined. The enthusiasm of the Chinese players for the National War was truly delightful. Ouyang Shuo was one of the biggest beneficiaries. As there were many participating players, to prevent too many wolves for too little meat, some smart players chose to fight in Goryeo. There were even some who chose to fight in Jinla and Nampa. The participation of a large number of combat profession players had greatly reduced the risk of Great Xia's Kingdom War. By the 29th of May, more than half of the 3 million players had chosen to fight in the Japanese battleground, and roughly won. 65 million players were participating. Among them, 900,000 people chose the northern route, which was the route of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas. Facts had proven that Great Xia was more popular in the Huaxia region. By the looks of it, 750,000 players had chosen the southern route, which wasn't much different from the northern route. However, it shouldn't be forgotten that 6 super guilds had chosen the southern route. Because Great Xia was fighting on 3 fronts, only 3 super guilds accompanied them. This also meant that apart from the elite teams of the 6 super guilds in the south, the real independent players might only be around 200,000, while the independent players in the north might be around 600,000. 1 to 3, the disparity was too great. If it weren't for the fact that some players were worried that the competition in the north would be too fierce, the gap might have been even wider. That was understandable. The 6 great families could only control the elite players. They didn't have much influence over ordinary players. On the contrary, Ouyang Shaw, a legendary figure who had emerged from the grassroots, had an unparalleled rallying power in this group of players. This didn't include the 1 million players who went to the battlefield in Korea and the 350,000 players who went to the battlefield in South Palm and Jinla otherwise. The disparity would be so great that Di Chun couldn't show his face. The moment the results came out, not only Di Chun, but the entire 6 great families were shocked. They knew that Ouyang Shua had a huge influence among ordinary players, but that was only a vague feeling. They had never seen the data directly. It wasn't until this set of naked statistics were placed on their desks that they truly felt how great Ouyang Shua's influence in the Huaxia region was. It was reported that the moment the results came out, the Feng family's patriarch locked himself in his study and didn't sleep for an entire night. It was obvious that he had received an extraordinary shock. Perhaps the Feng family's patriarch wasn't the only one who couldn't sleep. A huge change was quietly brewing. Even Ouyang Shua was a little surprised. The moment the results came out, Ouyang Shua was both happy and worried. Of course he was happy. Although this kind of influence was invisible, it was the foundation and soil for Ouyang Shua to realize his ambitions in the future. What worried him was that with the exposure of the data, Ouyang Shua could no longer keep a low profile. Too high profile, Ouyang Shua sighed in his heart. He was a pure realist, even a utilitarian. He had always adhered to the principle of do things in a high profile, but be a person in a low profile. He liked to hide in the dark and accumulate power to reap benefits. But with this exposure, Ouyang Shua could no longer keep a low profile. From now on, no matter what he did, there would be countless eyes watching him. It was as if he was under a microscope, constantly being observed. I might not be able to rest in peace in the future. Ouyang Shua was a little emotional. Even so, it was strange. This time, he wasn't afraid. Instead, his heart was as calm as still water. Fine, from this moment on, I'll stand in the center of the stage. Being high profile had its benefits. Sooner or later, Ouyang Shua would need to adapt to life under the spotlight. Gaia Year 5, 1st of June, North Seaport. In the past few days, Ouyang Shua had sent off 4 batches of expeditionary troops at North Seaport. This time, he would personally take the stage and embark on this glorious and dark journey that was destined to be great. Beside Ouyang Shua, there were a few special guests. They were the Lord of Fallen Phoenix City, Feng Qiuhuang, the leader of Baleful Blood Mercenary Group, Xie Xiun, the leader of Snow Rose Mercenary Group, and Righteous Knight, the leader of Flowing Light Pavilion. 2 days ago, Lin Jing had set off with the elite group of Snow Rose Mercenary Group, including Ouyang Shua. The 5 of them were the leaders of the North Army in the Battle of Japan. Li Jing was in charge of commanding the army, and the leaders of the elite groups led the various guilds. Therefore, Ouyang Shua jokingly called the 5 of them the Japanese sightseeing group, the kind that only watched the show without doing anything. As for the independent players, Ouyang Shua had never thought of unifying them, nor did he have the ability to do so. Once they disembarked, they couldn't be restrained at all. Because it was already the month of the national war, those who should have set off had already set off. Just yesterday, Li Jing led the Flying Bear Army and set off under the protection of the Cliff Mountain Fleet's 5th Formation. Therefore, North Seaport was rather deserted today, and only the Royal Fleet was docked there. Emperor was always so eye-catching and bloody romance, and the others were dumbfounded. They didn't expect Great Xia to be able to build such a mighty warship, and they were all envious. Faced with the praise of bloody romance and the others, Ouyang Shua smiled without saying a word. They didn't know that Great Xia had already started to build more advanced ironclad warships. If there were no accidents, the first experimental warship would be launched at the end of the year. After boarding Emperor, the Royal Fleet didn't set off in a hurry because they were waiting. At 9 in the morning, the system announcement finally sounded as scheduled. World announcement: the first National War Month officially begins for 1 month. Leaders of a national war, please choose a buff based on your country's honor points. The buff will take effect immediately. Leaders with national weapons will automatically activate the blessing of national fortune. Please check the details yourself. The China region had 40 national honor points, all of which were obtained by Great Xia. Players could choose a total of 40 buffs of attack, defense, and speed. As soon as the announcement ended, Ouyang Shuo followed his previous calculations and decisively chose a buff of 20 attack and 20 defense. A balance between attack and defense was the way to go. At the same time, Ouyang Shuo checked the blessing of national fortune brought by the Xianyuan sword at his waist. Grand Emperor. The movement speed of the Huaxia region's participating troops increased by 20. Battle contribution increased by 5. Not bad. Ouyang Shuo nodded in satisfaction. In this way, the entire Huaxia region's participating troops, including the players, would enjoy a buff of 20 in attack, defense, and speed. Their overall strength would increase slightly. Currently, only the Huaxia region could enjoy such a benefit. Other countries would only get 10 national honor points, which was better than nothing. This buff was not limited to the battlefield in Japan. It was the same for Goryeo, Nanzhong, and Chenla. Even within the country, as long as there was a war, they would also enjoy the same buff. Ouyang Shuo closed the attribute panel, took a deep breath, faced the sea, and waved his arm. Set off. After giving the order, the royal fleet slowly sailed away from the port. Just as Ouyang Shuo and his party were setting off, the Pacific Fleet, which had set off 4 days ago, arrived at the waters near Hokkaido in the morning and fought with the patrolling Japanese fleet. A huge conspiracy was quietly engulfing Great Xia. P.S. My apologies for the late update. 7,489. Chapter 1051. The size of Tokyo was comparable to a medium-sized province in China, but the population was very dense. With this convenient condition, Mikasa was able to form a complete naval fleet, the Tokyo Fleet. The commander of the Tokyo Fleet was the pirate daimyo Kuki Yoshitaka, and the commander was a well-known pirate, including Murakami Takeyoshi. The two of them had crossed paths during the Sengoku period. To be precise, Murakami Takeyoshi was defeated by Kuki Yoshitaka. Kuki Yoshitaka was a retainer of Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi during the Azuchi Momoyama period of the Japanese Sengoku Warring States period. He was the 8th-generation leader of the Kuki family navy. In 1574, Kuki Yoshitaka suppressed the Ise Nagashima War and protected the Oda army at sea, making great contributions. Later, in the Second Battle of Mutsu River, Kuki Yoshitaka built an ironclad ship and crushed the navy of Murakami Takeyoshi, a subordinate of the Mori clan. Because of this achievement, he was awarded a territory of 35,000 stones and became known as a pirate. In addition to the Japanese navy, Mikasa also had a full army. The main generals of the army included the 3 heroes of the Japanese Sengoku Warring States, namely Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Oda Nobunaga was the commander, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and several other generals were the commanders. Note: for ease of understanding, the military establishment of the territories in the game world is based on Great Xia. The 3 of them were at the same time and had a deep relationship with each other. Of course, the most legendary one was Oda Nobunaga. In terms of military affairs, Oda Nobunaga used a lot of firearms. In terms of governance, he implemented the separation of soldiers and farmers, encouraged free trade, and rectified transportation routes, opening up the road to modern times. In the end, Oda Nobunaga overthrew the Muromachi shogunate that had ruled Japan for more than 200 years and brought an end to the Sengoku Warring States period that had lasted for more than 100 years. This also made the Oda clan the most powerful daimyo in the middle and late Sengoku Warring States period. However, on the eve of unifying Japan, Oda Nobunaga was plotted by his trusted retainer, Akira Mitsuhide, and committed suicide, ending his glorious life. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was born in a peasant family. He was originally in a Shigeru, low-level infantry, but rose to power after serving Oda Nobunaga. After Oda Nobunaga's death, Toyotomi Hideyoshi won the internal struggle and became Oda Nobunaga's successor. When Tokugawa Ieyasu was a teenager, he was sent to the Oda family as a hostage and established a friendship with the young Oda Nobunaga. Later, Tokugawa Ieyasu became a great help in establishing the Seiju alliance. After the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu led the Eastern Army to defeat the Western Army in the Battle of Sekigahara and establish the hegemony. Since then, he had destroyed the power of the Toyotomi family step by step and established the Tokugawa shogunate. In the game, Japan was in the Warring States period, and Mikasa City's historical talents were mainly from this period. Because Mikasa City was the most powerful city in Japan, it had almost all of Japan's top historical talents. The only special thing was that the person who entered the capital of Edo was not any of the daimyo from the Warring States period, but the Meiji Emperor, who was also a legend in Japanese history. Such a combination was indeed quite a headache. According to the information that Great Sia's Pacific Fleet had gathered, the Japanese fleet's first formation was stationed near Kyushu Island. The second formation was stationed on Shikoku Island, and the third and fourth formations were stationed on Honshu Island. There should only be the Japanese fifth formation near Hokkaido. Since the beginning of the year, Japan had been actively preparing for the upcoming national war. From then onwards, the Japanese fleet had strengthened the lockdown of the nearby seas, making it difficult for outsiders to obtain detailed information. Even the Black Snake Guards could only obtain basic information about Japan's geography and population. They did not know much about Mikasa City's military and other high-level information. It could be seen that Mikasa City had done a good job of keeping things secret. This time, the Japanese fleet had used a smokescreen. In this attack on Hokkaido, the admiral of the Pacific Fleet, Shi Lang, had arranged the 5 formations into a swallow-shaped formation. The first formation, where the flagship streamlight was located, was in the middle, while the second, third, fourth, and fifth formations were in the front, back, left, and right. This way, the Japanese fleet's vision could be broadened, and they could coordinate with each other. If the 5 formations were gathered together, it would be like a group of blind people sailing in the vast ocean. It was incredibly dangerous and stupid. Shi Lang's formation had been set up correctly, but this time, it had been challenged. When Jotai led the Pacific Fleet's second formation into Hokkaido, they immediately entered the Japanese fleet's encirclement. The Japanese fleet's 5 formations had simultaneously appeared in this region. This is impossible. Jotai was completely dumbfounded. Yesterday, when the Pacific Fleet had passed through the Strait of Korea and entered Japan's waters, the Scarlet Horse boats had detected the Japanese first and third formations, but there had been nothing out of the ordinary. How had the Japanese fleet's 5 formations appeared in Hokkaido in the blink of an eye? Boom, boom, boom. The Japanese fleet naturally would not give Jotai an explanation. Under Kuki Yoshitaka's command, they immediately started to bombard Jotai's forces, attempting to wipe them out in one fell swoop. Thanks to Liberty City's generosity and favoritism, Mikasa City had started to use firearms as soon as they had established the Japanese fleet. Mikasa City's cannons and firearms were not inferior to Great Sia's at all. Because the firearms manufacturing technology came from Liberty City, they were superior to Great Sia's. In the vast ocean, the Japanese fleet had formed a massive encirclement, and 200 or so battleships were arranged in a fan shape, madly firing at Jotai's forces. Massive cannonballs descended like meteors, falling towards Jotai's forces. Some pierced through the deck, some destroyed the mast, some destroyed the hull, and some missed, causing massive splashes on the surface of the ocean. Some unlucky deep-sea beasts had just risen to the surface and were about to take in some fresh air when they were hit by a cannonball. A massive crater was blasted open on their backs, causing blood and flesh to fly everywhere. It seemed that they would not be able to survive. This was what it meant to be caught in the crossfire. Seeing this, the nearby deep-sea beasts scrambled to escape to the periphery of the sea, unable to avoid it. Zhou Tai's forces were blasted into a daze, and they suffered heavy losses. "Hurry! Ask for help from the flagship." Zhou Tai gave the order, and a signal flare was immediately sent into the air. Following this, a flying device docked on the second formation's flagship rose into the air, and only after reaching a safe zone did it turn and fly out. After giving the order, Zhou Tai started to adjust the fleet's formation and set up a defensive formation. The Japanese fleet's overall strength was about the same as the Pacific Fleet, and Zhou Tai did not have the confidence to fight 1 against 5. Right now, the safest method was to wait until the main fleet arrived. Damn it, Zhou Tai, who had a bad temper to begin with, gritted his teeth, and his face turned ashen. On the Japanese fleet's flagship, Kuki Yoshitaka. On the top deck, the fleet commander, Kuki Yoshitaka, used a telescope to observe the battle situation in the distance, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. He smiled and said, "Very good, continue to fire. Don't give the enemy any time to rest." Hi. Kuki Yoshitaka noticed the enemy's flying device and knew that the enemy's reinforcements would arrive soon. As a famous pirate, Kuki Yoshitaka did not fear the Great Xia fleet. On the contrary, he was filled with confidence. Based on Kuki Yoshitaka's knowledge, the Japanese pirates had often attacked the coastal areas of Huaxia, and they had won more than they lost. Naturally, he did not fear Great Xia. Kuki Yoshitaka's appetite was not just the enemy's vanguard. He wanted to use them as bait to completely destroy Great Xia's Pacific Fleet and defend Japan's maritime rights. Come. Kuki Yoshitaka smiled. With the help of flying devices, communication conches, and signal flare, the Pacific Fleet commander Lang soon received Zhou Tai's distress signal. He frowned. "Send out the Scarlet Horse boats and flying devices to investigate the enemy's situation." Lang did not panic, nor did he immediately order for reinforcements. It was a taboo to attack without knowing the enemy's situation. As a mature general, Lang would naturally not make such a low-level mistake. Very soon, the 4 fleets sent out hundreds of Scarlet Horse boats, and they spread out like fish in the sea. They were in charge of gathering first-hand information and assisting the commander in making decisions. At the same time, 5 flying devices rose into the sky. "Send orders to the left and right wings to advance in battle formation," Lang ordered. "Yes, sir." As the fleet advanced, Lang received continuous reports. When he found out that the entire Japanese fleet had appeared, he was no less surprised than Zhou Tai. "This is troublesome." Lang's expression was grave. Even if he sent out the entire fleet, he would lose again because this was an away battle. To be honest, Lang did not have the confidence to win this naval battle easily. "There's no other way. I can only use my secret weapon." Lang did not want to fight with the Japanese fleet at this point in time. After all, the naval battle was only the first phase of the national war. The landing battle was the main event. If they were crippled now, then this national war would be very difficult to fight. Before the war, Ouyang Shuo had specially prepared a secret weapon for the Pacific Fleet. Lang did not expect that he would have to use this trump card so soon. During the 5th year of Gaia, the Japanese had been actively preparing for war. It was not as if Ouyang Shuo did not make any preparations. Just 2 months ago, Ouyang Shuo had used the opportunity to purchase demonic crystals from Lemuria to purchase 4 magic-powered submarines from Lemuria City at one time. Before the National War began, 3 of the submarines were allocated to the Pacific Fleet, and 1 was allocated to the Cliff Mountain Fleet. Under Lang's orders, the 3 magic-powered submarines instantly accelerated like ghosts. They followed the information of the flying devices and stealthily headed towards the battlefield. The entire process was silent. 12. Chapter 1052. Boom, boom, boom. The Japanese fleet's encirclement continued, continuously reducing the space that Zhou Tai's forces could move around in. 9 ghosts. Admiral, the enemy's main fleet will arrive in 2 hours. Kuki Yoshitaka raised his eyebrows and said in surprise, "They're quite fast." With that, Kuki Yoshitaka turned around and looked at the generals standing behind him. We have to speed up. We have to clean up the battlefield and change our formation before the enemy's main force arrives. Yes, the generals nodded. Zhou Tai's troops were in an even more difficult situation under the relentless bombardment of the Japanese. The warships on the periphery were sunk one after another, and blood flowed like rivers. It was a miserable scene. Like peeling an onion, Zhou Tai's forces were peeled off by the Japanese fleet. This was how naval battles were. If the firepower of both sides was not on the same level, the difference in casualties might be even greater than the difference in military strength. Although the Pacific Fleet's second formation could defend and counterattack under Zhou Tai's command, they were ultimately outnumbered and could only deal limited damage to the enemy. On average, Zhou Tai's troops had to pay the price of 6 warships for every Japanese warship that sank. Zhou Tai's troops were about to collapse. Why aren't the reinforcements here yet? Admiral, we can't hold on for much longer. The vice admiral was anxious. Zhou Tai was also anxious, but as the commander, not only could he not reveal his anxiety, but he also had to pretend to be calm and composed to stabilize the morale of the troops. Otherwise, they might not even have a chance of survival. Reinforcements are on their way. Tell our brothers to hold on a little longer, Zhou Tai said. Understood. The vice admiral gritted his teeth and turned to leave. He was already prepared to die. At most, we'll just die. The Great Xia army had never surrendered. We can't afford to lose that face. Another hour passed. Zhou Tai's troops were in a precarious situation. From the start of the battle, the difference in military strength between the two sides was getting bigger and bigger. At the start, it was 1 to 5, but now it was 1 to 15. The entire fleet was about to be wiped out by the Japanese. On the deck of the Nine Ghosts, Kuki Yoshitaka was observing the entire battlefield through his binoculars. He was very satisfied with the fleet's performance. He smiled and said, "There's still 1 more hour. It's enough to clean up the battlefield." At this moment, at the bottom of the sea, 3 magic-powered submarines passed through the battlefield of cannon fire like ghosts and quickly headed toward Nine Ghosts and the other 2 secondary flagships. One of them was Murakami Takeyoshi's flagship. Lemuria was indeed an advanced civilization. Their submarines were even faster than warships. 10 minutes later, all the submarines were in position. Fire. Following the order, the 3 submarines aimed at the bottom of their respective cabins almost at the same time. Boom, boom, boom. After 3 deafening explosions, the magic crystal cannons on the magic-powered submarine roared and released a beam of dazzling white light that was as thick as a bucket. Splitting the blue seawater, the cannons penetrated the bottom of the target's cabin easily and created a huge hole. The surging seawater found an outlet and surged into the cabin. What was even more shocking was that the white light didn't slow down at all and directly pierced through the enemy's ship. In this way, even if the warship used watertight compartment technology, it would still be useless. As expected of a bug-level existence, the might of the magic crystal cannon was enough to put any other cannon to shame. It was powerful, but it also burned a lot of money. With just 1 shot, 50 units of magic crystals were used up, worth 100,000 gold coins. On the surface of the sea, the 3 flagships sank at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, only half of the hull was left. What's going on? Under the protection of his bodyguards, Kuki Yoshitaka miserably boarded a lifeboat. Abandoning the ship was the only option. No one could answer Kuki Yoshitaka's question. As the 3 flagships sank to the bottom of the sea one by one, the originally lively battlefield fell silent. No one knew what had happened. Only Zhou Tai looked excited. He laughed loudly and said, "Brothers, reinforcements are here." Instantly, the entire remnant fleet was in an uproar. Things weren't over yet. Before the Japanese could react, the remaining 3 capital ships were also destroyed one by one. It was the same silent attack, the same sure hit. In less than 10 minutes, the Japanese fleet's command system was completely paralyzed. Just as Kuki Yoshitaka was about to board another warship and continue to command the battle, in the southern part of the Japanese fleet, Shirlang's main fleet was already in sight. How is this possible? When Kuki Yoshitaka finally boarded the nearest warship, the Pacific Fleet had already pounced. It turned out that Lang had used a deceptive tactic. Because of Mazu's existence, as well as the characteristics of the other territories, Great Xia's fleet was much faster than the fleets of the other territories. Kuki Yoshitaka didn't know about this. Thus, when the Pacific Fleet advanced at a normal speed, Kuki Yoshitaka didn't notice anything strange. In fact, he didn't even think about it. This was the wrong way of thinking. When they were about to reach the battlefield, the Pacific Fleet finally revealed its fangs. It instantly raised its speed to the maximum. A journey that should have taken 1 hour was completed in half an hour. As such, the Japanese fleet was once again caught off guard. Flagships were flagships not only because they were large, but also because they carried a complete command system, including nautical charts, sand tables, flags, war drums, messengers, and so on. Ordinary warships didn't have these things. Although Kuki Yoshitaka had boarded the warship, he couldn't quickly restore the command system. If he was given enough time, he would definitely be able to. The problem was, would Lang? Of course not. Lang had racked his brains to find an opening. The Pacific Fleet was like a ferocious tiger, biting its prey, wanting to kill it. The situation on the battlefield was instantly reversed. Just like that, the Japanese fleet's encirclement turned into the Pacific Fleet's counter-encirclement. Cannons boomed, and blood and flesh flew everywhere. A cruel naval battle once again took place, but this time both sides had lost one. Retreat. Although he was unwilling, Kuki Yoshitaka wisely chose to retreat. If they continued to fight, the Japanese fleet would definitely be buried in the ocean. At this moment, another furious roar came from the bottom of the warship. Boom! The dormant magic-powered submarine once again showed its might, sinking Kuki Yoshitaka's new flagship. This time, Kuki Yoshitaka wasn't blessed by the goddess of luck. Not long after his small boat left, a cannonball fell from the sky and hit the boat. No! Kuki Yoshitaka let out a cry of despair as the cannonball exploded beneath his feet. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. The Japanese fleet's commander finally died a pitiful death. His flesh and blood melted into the ocean, becoming food for the fishes. What happened next was nothing out of the ordinary. Relying on the magic-powered submarine, the Pacific Fleet launched a beautiful counterattack, defeating the Japanese fleet in one fell swoop and obtaining the first great victory of the National War. In the next few days, Lang would lead his fleet to hunt down the remnants of the Japanese fleet. He had to annihilate the Japanese fleet and completely seize control of the sea, creating the conditions for the second stage of the National War. Although Great Xia's Pacific Fleet had won, the dark clouds had yet to disperse. Why was the Japanese fleet so unconventional, turning a blind eye to Handan City's Haijo fleet and focusing on going against the Great Xia's Pacific Fleet? What role did the Haijo fleet play in the formation of the Japanese fleet? As the Japanese fleet was destroyed, everything became a mystery. 89. Chapter 1053. As an island nation, there were close to 100 ports along the coast of Japan. More than 70% of these ports were concentrated in Honshu, and the top 5 ports were all located here. In comparison, there were very few ports near Hokkaido, and even fewer suitable for an army to land and fight. After considering the geographical location of the island and the deployment of the army, only Kushiro Port in the east, Rumung Port in the west, and Tomakomai Port in the south were left to choose from. Keisuke Honda was well aware of this. Even before the war, Mikasa City had spent a lot of effort to build an impregnable defense line along the coast of the main port. Keisuke Honda was really ruthless. Before the war, he ordered the demolition of the port and used torpedoes to block the port so that the Great Xia fleet couldn't even enter the port. They could only land on the beach on both sides. The core of the defense line was 3 rows of cannons, arranged from the lowest to the highest to ensure the endurance of the firepower network. The cannons looked down from above, and the interwoven firepower network could cover the entire beach area. The dense firepower network was enough to destroy any landing force. In addition, there were arrow towers behind the cannons, and rows of archers were stationed there. They could use projectiles to cover the beach area and ensure the safety of the archers. Finally, there were gunners. They hid in the cannons and complemented the cannons through the firing ports. What was even more amazing was that this combination basically eliminated the possibility of Great Xia's simulated aircraft bombing, unless the aircraft acted as a suicide squad and launched a death charge. The aircraft were expensive to build, and they couldn't afford it. Only someone as perverted as Keisuke Honda could think of such a perverted defense line. In order to build such a war fortress at the major ports, Mikasa City had almost emptied out all of its assets. Fortunately, the Japanese players were very united and contributed money and effort in the process. June 2nd, Hokkaido's Kushiro port. At around 9 in the morning, the Cliff Mountain Fleet escorted the Expeditionary Army's vanguard troops to the nearby sea area. On the flagship Gaihai, the Expeditionary Army's vanguard officer, Guizi, looked at the cannons on the shore and frowned. He asked Udayo, the commander of the Cliff Mountain Fleet, "General, can the cannons hit the enemy's position?" Udayo shook his head. "The enemy is very experienced, and the cannons are very well arranged. Because the range of our cannons and the enemy's cannons are equal, the enemy's cannons can hit the beach, but our warships can't reach the coast to fire." The battleship was huge, and its draft was extremely deep. It was impossible for it to reach the shore normally, or else it would directly run aground. Guizi continued to ask, "Can we use aerial bombing? If the aircraft doesn't want to be shot down by the enemy, it has to hover at least 400 meters in the air. The accuracy of the bombs dropped will be greatly reduced. It's worth a try, but don't get your hopes up." Mimicry aircraft had long become the standard equipment of the Great Xia Navy. Not to mention a fleet, even a formation would be equipped with 2 to 3 mimicry aircraft on the flagship. Udayo was very familiar with the combat characteristics of the aircraft. "This is troublesome." Guizi gritted her teeth and said, "No matter what, let's give it a try first. That's the only way." Udayo had no other choice. Very soon, 5 mimicry aircrafts rose from the deck of the flagship. They lined up in a straight line and flew unsteadily toward the enemy's position. Because it was by the sea, it was often windy. There was a westerly wind blowing, especially high up in the sky, where the wind force reached a force of 5 and above. The bombs dropped from a high altitude would easily miss the target due to the wind. The first round of bombing didn't hit the target. When Udayo saw this, he glanced at Guizi unobtrusively with an awkward expression. Although it was affected by the wind force, it was still too embarrassing. Especially in front of their allies, it would damage the prestige of the Great Xia Army. The second round of bombing didn't significantly improve the situation. Only one bomb hit, and it only exploded at the edge of the enemy's artillery battery. There weren't many casualties. The next few rounds of bombing were average. It was impossible to shake the enemy's defensive line with such a degree of bombing. The most important thing was time. The war only lasted for a month, and it had to be resolved quickly. It was estimated that the Expeditionary Army commander, Han Xin, would lead the main force to the front line tomorrow morning. By then, the Navy, field legions, combat professional players, and logistics personnel would add up to more than 3 million people and thousands of ships. For such a huge fleet, every day they were delayed at sea would consume a shocking amount of resources. No matter how wealthy Great Xia was, they wouldn't be able to last more than a few days. Therefore, the vanguard troops had to break through the situation in the shortest time possible and successfully land on the beach. They would then establish a stronghold on land and advance inland to replenish their resources. Since we can't do it by air, we can only attack by force. Guizi turned around and looked at the commanders. "Who is willing to lead the troops in a battle?" "I'm willing to go." Just as she finished her sentence, a valiant general stepped forward. It was the commander of the 1st Legion of Fallen Phoenix City's Blazing Flame Army, one of the 10 most valiant generals in history. Feng Xiaohuang had displayed great sincerity in this expedition by arranging for the Blazing Flame Army to be the vanguard. Other than repaying Great Xia, Feng Xiaohuang also wanted to make use of this battle to build up the reputation of fallen Phoenix City and earn a lot of merit points to be promoted to a duke. Seeing that Handan City was about to be established, how could Feng Xiaohuang not be anxious? Out of the 3 remaining territories in the Huaxiao region, only fallen Phoenix City had yet to be promoted to a capital city. Guozi nodded her head in satisfaction. Go, yes. After a while, Ranmin brought 10,000 elites of the Blazing Flame Army to the Scarlet Horseboat and rushed towards the coast. Once they reached the shore, they jumped off the boat and rushed towards the shore. The moment the soldiers at the front stepped on the soft sand, the enemy troops moved. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, cannons were fired. The cannonball the size of a head exploded on the beach, sending the golden sand flying in all directions. Like a bullet, it shot towards the soldiers in the surroundings. Ah, my eyes! Some unlucky soldiers were hit in the eyes by the flying sand and cried out in pain. Raise your shields! The tall and sturdy Ranmin wielded a long spear and commanded his troops to scatter in all directions. While dodging the artillery shells, he used his shields to block the rain of arrows and charged forward. Kill! Ranmin's task was to charge into the fort. With a schwa sound, numerous steel shields were erected, forming an iron wall. Even though Ranmin was a valiant general, he was not stupid. The 10,000 elites that he brought were all the best of the best. Among them, there were also a few archers for cover. Every team had an archer. On the Gaihai ship, Guozi looked at the charging troops with anticipation and nervousness. Whether we succeed or not depends on this battle. Chapter 1054. Author's note: Apologies. The Japanese's defense line was not to be trifled with. By the time Ranmin's troops reached the fort, 3 out of 10 of the 10,000 elite soldiers were gone. If it weren't for the fact that they were elite soldiers, the troops would have collapsed long ago. The further they went, the more concentrated the enemy's firepower became. When they arrived in front of the battery, the numerous holes below continuously shot out bullets. Fortunately, the sword and shield soldiers were all wearing armor and had chest protectors to protect their vital parts. Otherwise, if they were hit, they would have died immediately. The bullets hit the armor and made a ding-ding sound, like the call of the Grim Reaper. If they were unlucky enough to be hit in the face without armor, there was basically no chance of survival. What was good for Ranmin's troops was that once they reached the fort, the most lethal cannons lost their effectiveness and no longer posed a threat to them. Even the enemy's archers at the back, because of the obstructed line of sight, their damage was greatly reduced. The corners of the fort were the enemy's blind spots, so it became a safe zone. Charge! Ranmin's face was fierce. Hearing this, some of the soldiers immediately set up a simple ladder and leaned against the fort. Using their shields to protect the front, they skillfully climbed up the fort with their tang swords. Their movements were very efficient, and it was obvious that they were well trained. In the distance, Guozi saw this and nodded in satisfaction. At least they didn't make me lose face. Although the fort was considered a defensive structure, it couldn't be compared to a city wall. Not only was the fort narrower by half, but the front row of the fort was only 4 meters high, making it very easy to climb. Although Ranmin was tall, his movements were like a nimble gorilla. In 2 or 3 moves, he climbed up the fort. Brandishing his spear, he killed the 6 Japanese soldiers that surrounded him. Soon, Ranmin had a firm foothold on top of the fort and led more soldiers onto the fort. Guozi, who was far away, saw this and her eyes flashed. She waved the flag, and with a schwa sound, the remaining 60,000 elite soldiers of the 1st Legion of the Blazing Flame Army, who had boarded the Scarlet Horseboats a long time ago, rushed towards the beach. Boom! 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 Another burst of cannons sounded. Ranmin's troops only affected the first row of forts. The next 2 rows of forts, as well as the arrow towers, were still operating normally, firing towards the beach. With the brave performance of the vanguard troops, personally led by the Legion commander, the Blazing Flame Army was no longer afraid. The generals and soldiers braved the sky, full of cannon fire, and roared as they charged forward. Glory to the blazing flame army. Yes, if they won this battle, the blazing flame army would be renowned throughout the world. If they wanted to break through the enemy's defensive line, there were two major problems. The first was to open up a gap in the defensive line and use it as a base point to spread out in all directions. After paying a heavy price, the 10,000 elites of the Blazing Flame Army completed this difficult task. The second was to guard the gap, which was even more difficult than the first. Seeing Ranmin's troops climb onto the forts, the Mikasa City Army and the Japanese army went berserk, charging towards Ranmin without any regard for their own lives. From the looks of it, it seemed like Ranmin's troops would be drowned. The Blazing Flame Army was not to be outdone either. They swore to defend the hard-earned glory of the Blazing Flame Army with their lives. Both sides fought with their lives on the line. In their eyes, there was only offense and no defense. The intense battle caused even the heavens and earth to change color. However, the gale on the sea was getting stronger and stronger. The waves surged and splashed against the beach. The Scarlet Horse boats that the Expeditionary Army used to disembark were rocked up and down by the waves. Some of the Scarlet Horse boats capsized, causing a disaster at sea. Even a fleet that was docked on the outskirts began to move up and down. Although they had lowered their sails, they were still unable to stabilize themselves. This was because the ships were too densely packed and could easily collide with each other. This damned weather. Udayo, the commander of the Cliff Mountain Fleet, complained as he began to evacuate the ships. At the same time, he arranged for the sailors to go into the sea to rescue the Blazing Flame Army soldiers who had fallen into the water. Luofeng City was located in the hinterland of the north. Thus, the majority of the Blazing Flame Army soldiers did not know how to swim. The battle on the forts was extremely intense. The soldiers on both sides were in a killing frenzy. In less than half an hour, the forts were completely dyed red with blood. This was because corpses continuously fell from the forts, accompanied by the rain of blood. This completely obscured the line of sight of the musketeers that were hiding within the forts. This showed how intense the battle was. To the Japanese, every battle in the country war was a decisive battle, a battle to the death. Every time they lost a position on the battlefield, it meant that they were one step closer to the destruction of their country. Therefore, they had no way out and could only fight to the death. This was especially true for the Japanese professional players. The destruction of their country was not only a matter of honor, but also their lives. If they could defend, then everything would be fine. If they couldn't, then rather than being forced to reincarnate by Gaia, they would rather die on the battlefield. The Japanese were still very fierce. When they put their lives on the line, it was enough to make people tremble in fear. The most obvious example was that Ranmin's troops, who had finally managed to charge onto the forts, were being attacked by the enemy. Their numbers were decreasing at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. The positions that they had just occupied were constantly being taken back by the enemy. Seeing that the positions that his men had sacrificed their lives for were about to be lost, the martial mourning heavenly king Ranmin was enraged. "Kill!" Old K let a loud roar. His voice shook the entire arena, sending shockwaves everywhere. Ranmin's originally tall and sturdy body suddenly expanded. His muscles bulged like a small mountain, and his veins popped out. A fierce aura rushed out, causing people to feel fear. The long spear was as red as blood. The Japanese soldiers surrounding Ranmin on the forts were the most. Seeing Ranmin's power, they were so scared that they retreated instead of advancing. Ranmin coldly smiled and took the initiative to attack. In an instant, flesh and blood flew everywhere and corpses littered the battlefield. The crazed Ranmin was like an ancient beast. He rampaged through the battlefield, invincible. Wherever his long spear passed, no one was able to block a single attack from Ranmin. Even the Japanese players couldn't do that. Fear spread like a plague. No wonder he was one of China's 10 great generals. He really made people tremble in fear. "Let's go together." The Japanese soldiers defeated their fear and once again charged at Ranmin. Ranmin's eyes were like lightning. His face was cold, an unspeakable killing intent and ferocity. He was like an emotionless killing machine. He weaved his way through the enemy's ranks, not knowing the word fatigue. If a person gets in his way, he will kill. Kill. Stimulated by this, the Raging Flame Corps vanguards morale soared. They became even more ferocious and wanted to take back their positions. This battle entered its most desperate stage. Both sides forgot about life and death. They forgot about their comrades. They forgot about everything else. In their eyes, there was only the enemy. In their hearts, there was only one thought: kill him. The number of casualties rose like a tide. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. As the saying goes, one is no match for the many. Although Ramin was brave, he was only one person. The Japanese army that was stationed behind him seemed to be endless. Every time a batch died, another batch would take its place. There were only a few Raging Flame Corps soldiers left standing on the forts. Out of the 10,000 Raging Flame Corps soldiers, not even one remained. A desolate feeling filled the battlefield, causing people to be moved. Chapter 1055. The persistence of the Blazing Flame Army finally paid off. Just as Old K was about to collapse, the second batch of Blazing Flame Army finally arrived at the base of the fort. Kakaka! They quickly set up ladders to reinforce the vanguard. General, we're here. The soldiers only had time to report to the Legion commander before they raised their swords and charged forward. With the addition of nearly 50,000 soldiers, they finally stabilized their position and began to counterattack the enemy. The situation was reversed. Seeing this, Old K's heart was filled with pride. His already exhausted body once again burst forth with frightening strength and continued to slaughter the enemy. If they won this battle, Old K would be the main contributor. In the distance, Guizi saw this and became excited. She decisively ordered city guards advance. Yes. On the Scarlet Horseboat, the commander of the City Guard's First Corps, Zhao Sihu, received the military order. His blood instantly boiled as he roared. Boys, the Blazing Flame Army has already established their position. What should we do? Flatten. Flatten. That's right, flatten the enemy's position and raise the prestige of the Great Xia Army. Zhao Sihu didn't want the Blazing Flame Army to dominate. Raise the prestige. Raise the prestige. The city guards continuously struck their shields with their tang swords, their fighting spirits soaring. Move out. With a military order, the city guards' First Corps, under Zhao Sihu's command, braved the wind and waves and quickly advanced towards the beach. The city guards weren't landlubbers. As the city guards entered the battlefield, this fierce battle finally reached its climax. In the following period of time, the brave Tiger Corps First Corps and the Blazing Flame Army Second Corps were brought into the battlefield by Guizi. The Expeditionary Army's advantage continued to expand. On the contrary, the Japanese's position was in a disadvantageous position and their morale was greatly reduced. Defeat was only a matter of time. Even so, the Japanese army's tenacity shocked Guizi. The two sides fought from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m., and only after all of the 100,000 Japanese players had died did the battle finally come to an end. No one had expected that the Expeditionary Army would lose more than 35,000 men in a local beach landing battle, and that they had only captured a little more than 10,000 territorial troops from Mikasa City that had survived. What a loss! Looking at the tens of thousands of Blazing Flame Army corpses on the beach, Guizi's heart ached. Fortunately, we've finally taken it down. As the vanguard, Guizi did not disappoint. Within a day, he had completed the beach landing and opened up a forward base for the main force. He was worthy of being called a famous general. On the same day, the United States Pacific Fleet also completed their encirclement of the Japanese fleet. To everyone's surprise, the Southern Army also completed the beach landing on the same day and smoothly advanced into Kyushu Island, which made everyone's jaw drop. The armies of the North and South once again stood on the same starting line. The first phase of the Battle of Japan came to an end. The greater and more intense battle had just begun. On June 3rd, Han Xin led the main force to Hokkaido's Kushiro Harbor. Han Xin was an immortal general who was very good at seizing opportunities. After the main force went ashore, he simply said, "Speed is the most important thing in war," and the vast army did not stop at all. They immediately divided into 3 groups and quickly rushed toward the hinterland of Hokkaido. The left group was made up of Guazi's Blazing Flame Army and the Baleful Blood Mercenary Group, S-Elites. The middle group was made up of Han Xin's Leopard Army and the Snow Rose Mercenary Group, S-Elites. The right group was made up of the City Guard's 1st Corps, the Leopard Army's 1st Corps, and the Stalwart Tiger Army's 1st Corps. Chao Chun was the main commander. Chao Chi was the vice commander, and the Fallen Leaf Alliance, S-Elites, were also there. As for solo players, Han Xin did not make any rules. They could choose which army they wanted, or they could do whatever they wanted. Within Hokkaido, there were many Japanese players waiting to PvP with him. Before leaving, Han Xin gave an order to the armies on the left and right. "Within 3 days, we must conquer the entire Hokkaido and create a base for our army. We will not disappoint you." Guazi and Chao Chun both cupped their fists with serious expressions. The 3 armies were like 3 sharp arrows, with Kushiro Harbor at the center, shooting towards the heart of Hokkaido. One could only imagine what kind of massacre these 900,000 soldiers and 900,000 combat class players would cause in Hokkaido within 3 days. Han Xin wanted to take advantage of Japan's low morale to wipe out Hokkaido in one fell swoop. This was a massive challenge for Mikasa Castle's General Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was in charge of Hokkaido's defense. That morning, Tokugawa Ieyasu gave the order to burn all of the ships docked at the southern part of Hokkaido, completely cutting off the army's path of retreat to Honshu. "If we can't defend Hokkaido, I'll commit seppuku," Tokugawa Ieyasu said. Hearing this, a wave of grief and indignation spread throughout the Japanese army, causing them to be deeply moved. There is a saying in the art of war: an army filled with righteous indignation will win. It was unknown whether or not Tokugawa Ieyasu would be able to create a miracle. After all, his opponent was the godly General Han Xin. Even though Tokugawa Ieyasu was one of Japan's 3 heroes, he was nothing in front of Han Xin. In fact, even Guazi was far superior to him. The 2 of them were simply not on the same level. Goguryeo. While the battle in Japan was in full swing, the battle in Goguryeo was also in full swing. 2 days ago, the Tang Empire's god of war, Li Jing, led the Flying Bear Army, the Imperial Guards, and the Beijiang Army. Together with 1 million Chinese combat class players, they also split into 3 groups and charged into Goguryeo's territory. This time, Goguryeo had shot itself in the foot. The Goguryeo players initially thought that China couldn't do anything to them since they were stuck in the battle in Japan. They didn't expect Great Xia to be so ferocious and take the initiative to attack Goguryeo. They didn't expect the Chinese players to be so united this time and gather around Great Xia to fight to the death with Goguryeo. This was simply bad news for Goguryeo. Under Li Jing's command, the Great Xia army won one victory after another. They swept through everything and were almost invincible. Stimulated by this, the Chinese players roared and followed behind the army to reap the fruits of victory. After receiving the news, the hesitant Chinese players boldly teleported to Hardstone City, formed a second army, and advanced into Goguryeo's territory. Because they were traveling by land, the players were very enthusiastic. In just 2 days, another 150,000 combat class players joined the battlefield in Goguryeo. With this help, the Great Xia army became more and more powerful. Not long after the war began, they seemed to have an irresistible force, and victory was within their grasp. How could the world not be shocked? This was like a water droplet effect. After the first batch of reinforcements, there was a second batch very quickly. A steady stream of Chinese players poured into Goguryeo's territory and started a monstrous massacre. No one would complain about having too many contribution points, right? The good situation on the battlefield in Goguryeo was undoubtedly because the soldiers were capable, but it was also because of Li Jing's command. Li Jing was a very resilient commander. Once he identified a goal, he wouldn't relax until he achieved it. As long as he didn't conquer Goguryeo, Li Jing wouldn't slack off at all. Chapter 10:56. When the defense gap was opened, the defense line built by the Japanese near the port lost its purpose and could no longer stop the Xia Expeditionary Force from sweeping through Hokkaido. On the 5th of June, when Ouyang Shuo and his party arrived at Kushiro Port, the three armies under Han Xian's command had already surrounded the central city of Hokkaido, Sapporo. In just 2 days, the expeditionary force had swept through the entire territory of Hokkaido, leaving only Sapporo. Seeing that the enemy was unstoppable, Hokkaido's garrison, Tokugawa Ieyasu, deployed all the garrison forces to Sapporo, preparing to fight to the death with the Xia Expeditionary Force. In contrast, although the Southern Army had successfully landed on Kyushu Island, their progress on the island wasn't as fast. After 2 days, they had only conquered half of the island. After receiving the news, Ouyang Shuo sent a letter to Di Chun as the leader of the national war, ordering the Southern Army to speed up and enter Honshu as soon as possible to complete the encirclement of Edo. Di Chun's explanation was that the terrain of Kyushu Island was complicated and the army had to fight steadily and not underestimate the enemy. After hearing this explanation, Ouyang Shuo only sneered and announced Di Chun's reply to the public. No one was a fool. Ouyang Shuo didn't care if Di Chun was intentionally creating trouble for Great Xia, or if he was under pressure from the Silver Hand and had no choice but to cooperate with the war in Japan. As long as it was exposed, Ouyang Shuo didn't need to say anything and the people would naturally turn against him. Digging his own grave, Ouyang Shuo commented, Di Chun wasn't a fool, but as a member of the Silver Hand, he would inevitably be restricted by the organization when he enjoyed the convenience brought by the organization. There was no free lunch in the world. As expected, when the news came out, the crowd was agitated and the players demanded an explanation from Di Chun. Of course, Di Chun couldn't give them anything and could only respond in silence. He must be suffering in his heart. Handan City's prestige in the Huaxia region had almost fallen to the freezing point. On the morning of the 6th of June, Sapporo. After yesterday's fierce battle, the majestic Sapporo city was already in ruins. The city walls were stained with blood, and there were holes everywhere, as though it could collapse at any time. At the foot of the city walls, the corpses of both sides were piled up into a small hill. The blood that seeped out dyed the moat outside the city red. There were only a few Japanese soldiers left standing on the city walls. Everyone knew that Sapporo could not hold on any longer. Han Xian deserved to be a master of tactics. It was because of his eagerness for quick success that he made the decision to sweep Hokkaido quickly, which made Tokugawa Ieyasu's arrangements seem very hasty. Sapporo was not as stable as the tall city walls looked. City Lord Residence. Tokugawa Ieyasu looked at the group of generals in front of him. He didn't look depressed. Instead, he looked very fanatical. Soldiers, we can't defend Sapporo anymore. There's no need to defend it anymore. Even if we die, we have to die honorably. We have to bite off a piece of flesh from the enemy. I order the rest of the troops to gather at the south gate and take the initiative to attack. Hi. The generals also had fanatical expressions on their faces, as if they were unafraid of death. Tokugawa Ieyasu said loudly, For us, this is the last battle. Enjoy it. Fight to the death. Fight to the death. Go. Tokugawa Ieyasu waved his arm and gave the last military order. The generals lined up and walked out of the castellan's mansion, gathered their troops, and headed towards the south city gate in an orderly manner. The war was cruel. In just 1 day, more than half of the Sapporo garrison had been killed. Right now, there were less than 30,000 people who could still gather. Creak! The south city gate opened on its own. Outside the gate was the Huaxia army. Kill! The 30,000 fanatical people rushed out of the city gate without any regard for their lives. Once they left, there was no turning back. It was still the Castellan's mansion. After sending the last troop to the path of death, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the commander of Japan's Hokkaido and one of the three heroes of the Sengoku period, took a bath and changed his clothes. Then, he came to a quiet room that had been prepared for a long time. With a peaceful expression, he took out a knife that was specially used to cut the abdomen and slowly stabbed it into his abdomen. At 10:15 in the morning on June 6th, Tokugawa Ieyasu committed suicide in the Castellan's mansion. At the same time, the 30,000 remaining Japanese who rushed out of the city gate were all killed in less than 2 hours. This also announced the destruction of Sapporo City and even the entire Hokkaido. The death of Tokugawa Ieyasu and the fall of Hokkaido became a symbol of the Battle of Japan. Unexpectedly, the Northern Army of Hwasha took down one of the 4 islands of Japan in only 6 days. How could people not be terrified by such military power? On the afternoon of June 6th, Ouyang Shua's group arrived at Sapporo City. In Sapporo City, Ouyang Shua gave a passionate speech, praising the bravery of the Northern Army and commending them for their contributions. He also rewarded the soldiers who performed well in this battle. There were even 3 players who received a piece of purple gold equipment each, causing the other players to go green with envy. Didn't they risk their lives to exchange for a piece of purple gold equipment? Ouyang Shu even announced that after the army reached Edo City, he would reward a batch of outstanding soldiers, and the reward would be 3 times larger than this time. Ouyang Shua's wealth was obviously a great catalyst. The moment he said that, the players became more enthusiastic, and they cheered. After the commendation, Ouyang Shua met with Han Exine alone and announced his opinion on how to deal with Hokkaido. Immediately send out troops to search for all the food that can be found in the country to support the front line. Conscript all civilians and civilian boats to transport food. Conscript all craftsmen to make arrows and other consumable war materials for the army. Ouyang Shua used the word all 3 times consecutively, which showed how determined he was. For this expedition, the biggest problem was the transportation of food. If they were to rely on Great Xia's support, they wouldn't be able to transport the food back and forth a few times, and it wouldn't be able to support the astonishing consumption of 2 million soldiers. The problem of food had to be solved on the spot. Before the Kingdom War started, Mikasa City had already implemented a food control system for the cities and villages under its command. It was impossible to find a large amount of food from the granaries. The only way was to plunder the stored food of the civilians. Even if there's only a grain of rice left, I will still collect it. If the civilians don't want to starve, then sign up for the military service. The military will guarantee basic food supplies. The rest of the people will be left to their own devices. Ouyang Shua was so ruthless this time. It wasn't that all the Japanese deserved to be killed, but he wasn't that narrow-minded. It was just that extreme times called for extreme measures. The most important thing now was to take down the Japanese as soon as possible. Apart from massacring the civilians, the military can do whatever you want. I will grant you the authority to do whatever you want. You don't have to consider the people's feelings or the impact of the post-war reconstruction. Prioritize the current war as the most important task. Ouyang Shua drew a bottom line for the military that couldn't be crossed. If the military massacred civilians on a large scale, no matter who the target was, it would be a taboo. It would also be a huge hidden danger to the military, and it would harm both the military and the military. This bottom line must not be opened. Even if it was the Japanese battlefield, Ouyang Shua had to uphold his bottom line. Understood. Han Exine nodded solemnly. The king rarely made such a ruthless move. This battle was obviously different from the past. Ouyang Shua said, "Go and prepare for the sea-crossing battle tomorrow. We will officially send the troops to Honshu." Yes. Looking at Han Exine's departing figure, Ouyang Shua sighed deeply with a gloomy gaze. 9. Chapter 10:57. Compared to Hokkaido, the Japanese's defense in Honshu was even more insane. With Edo as the boundary, Mikasa City set up 3 steel defense lines in the south and 4 in the north. As for the defense of the main port, it would be even crazier than Hokkaido. Keisuke Honda's strategy was very clear, which was to defend for a month. Han Xian naturally scoffed at this. No matter how good a defense was, it was nothing more than a decoration in the face of an extremely powerful attack. The art of war says the best defense is offense. As for how to attack Hanzhou Island, Han Xian already had a complete set of battle plans. On the 7th of June, the Northern Army began to move. Guo led the Roaring Flame Army across the strait and landed on the northernmost tip of Hanzhou Island. She was responsible for sweeping all the way from north to south. The 1st Legion of the City Guard Army, the 1st Legion of the Brave Tiger Army, and the 1st Legion of the Soaring Eagle Army were divided into 3 squads and landed at 3 different ports on the northern side of the island to support the Blazing Flame Army. There were simply too many ports in Honshu, and the Japanese army was limited, so it was impossible for them to have an airtight defense. Once Han Xian found a loophole, the enemy's entire army would collapse. Moreover, the Expeditionary Army had the support of Hokkaido, ensuring a steady stream of provisions and supplies to the front lines. Even if they were to fight on 4 fronts, they would still be able to handle the situation with relative ease. From this, it could be seen that the Expeditionary Army's strategic significance in capturing Hokkaido was greater than its actual combat significance. As for how the 4 armies would break through the Japanese's defense line near the port, with Ranmin's experience of taking down the Kushiro port, it wouldn't be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It's just a matter of how much damage they can sustain, Han Xian said. As the saying goes, the merciful do not command an army. When it was time to be ruthless, Han Xian would also attack his own people. For the sake of the final victory, sometimes sacrificing a group of troops was something that could not be helped. How could there be no deaths in war? In addition to these 4 armies, General Han Xian personally led the Leopard Hidden Army to the vicinity of Edo. While attacking the northern part of Honshu, he also intended to sweep the outer fortresses of Edo, clearing the obstacles for the final siege. Han Xian's arrangement minimized the time spent in the Kingdom War. The more the Japanese wanted to delay, the more flustered Han Xian would be. There was no way to delay any longer. Of course, the final siege would require the cooperation of the Southern Army. Not to mention anything else, just the 1 million Imperial Guard stationed in Edo was not something that the Northern Army could handle alone. In the past 2 days, under the pressure of public opinion, the Southern Army had slightly increased the speed of the sweep. Today, they had almost taken over the entire Kyushu Island and established a large rear. In a few days, the Southern Army will continue north to attack Shikoku Island. Even then, the progress of the Southern Army was still extremely lagging behind, and it caused Ouyang Shuo to be rather displeased. Fortunately, he possessed a trump card in his possession that could turn the situation around at the critical moment. This trump card was only known to the leaders of the Kingdom War. Even Keisuke Honda didn't know about it. Sometimes, Ouyang Shuo even wished that Di-chan would die like this. If that was the case, he would send a big gift to Di-chan. He just didn't know if Di-chan would be able to accept it. In the following week, the 3 major battlefields related to Huaxia entered a critical period. Apart from the army led by Han Xian stirring up trouble in the northern part of Japan's Honshu Island, causing a series of massacres and dismembering the so-called steel defense line that Japan had built up, the other 2 battlefields were equally intense. In Goryeo, the army led by Li Jing was still unstoppable. In just 10 days, they had taken over the entire northern part of Goryeo and officially fought their way to the capital of Goryeo, Han City. Different from the battlefield in Japan, Li Jing planned to surround Han City, but not attack. He would then use this opportunity to sweep through the southern part of Goryeo and turn Han City into an isolated city. Before this, Great Xia had already destroyed 4 countries. This strategy of first wiping out the outer barrier before attacking the capital had been tried and tested. It had already been proven to be the most effective way to destroy a country. The root of this was probably the setting of Gaia's Imperial Guards. Even in the 5th year of Gaia, compared to the Imperial Guards, the territorial armies were still at a disadvantage. They were the side that could be easily defeated. This situation was not only very common in small and medium-sized game zones like Star Nation and Anna Nation. Even in a huge region like Huaxia, where there were global hegemons like Great Xia and Handan City, the situation was the same. Furthermore, before the National War, the capital and the territories were often in a state of hostility. It was even more so for those game zones that only had one capital and one territory. Usually, both parties were in a state of competition, trying to fight for dominance in their respective regions. With the advent of the National War, although the two major forces were united, it was ultimately a temporary cooperation that was forced. How could they really be so close? Therefore, when the territory was being swept by the enemy, the Imperial Guards would usually not be mobilized. Just like in Japan, Emperor Meiji supported Mikasa City and allowed it to move around the periphery. The million Imperial Guards in Edo were all stationed in the city and did not move. As Keisuke Honda's biggest goal was to hold on for a month, Edo was the final barrier. The stronger the garrison in Edo, the longer they could hold on. Therefore, although he was unwilling, Keisuke Honda did not raise any objections. It was foreseeable that after the National War, even if Japan could retain its territory, Mikasa City would be completely destroyed in this war and would no longer be able to lead the situation in Japan. Perhaps, Emperor Meiji would be the biggest winner of this war. Other than the battle between the field troops in Goryeo, there was another thing that was worth paying attention to. It was the battle between the navy of both sides, which was much more exciting than the naval battle in Japan. There was no other reason than the fact that Goryeo had a famous naval general, Sun-sen. This legendary figure was once rated as the #1 general in Asia by Goryeo. His most noteworthy battle was the famous Battle of Luoyang Sea. The Battle of Luoyang Sea took place at the end of the 16th century AD. It was named for the fact that it took place in Luoyang. The two parties involved were the allied forces of the Ming dynasty in Goryeo and the Japanese armies, Shinzu, Tachibana. The commanders were Chun Lin and Deng Zilong from the Ming dynasty, Sun-sen from Goryeo, and Shin Yoshihiro from Japan. In the end, the allied forces won. At that time, the true ruler of Japan was one of the three heroes of Japan's warring states, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. In this national war, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was appointed by Keisuke Honda to guard Kyushu and Shikoku, while Oda Nobunaga was naturally the guard of Honshu. As for the Battle of Luoyang Sea, this naval battle had a very important position in the history of Huaxia and even in the world. It greatly affected the geopolitical situation in Northeast Asia at that time. The Battle of Luoyang Sea was even rated as one of the 8 ancient naval battles in the world by the West Point Military Academy. In this battle, Sun-sen led the Goryeo turtle ship fleet to defeat the Japanese with fewer troops and heavily injured them. In the end, he died a heroic death. In reality, the true commander of this battle was the Ming Army's Navy commander, Chun Lin. However, this credit was taken by the Goryeo Sun-sen. Sun-sen had always been regarded as the main contributor in this war. Because of this, he became a great hero in the hearts of the people of Goryeo. After his death, he even received the posthumous title of Loyal Warrior. The Goryeo people even used this as a backdrop to film a movie called The Battle of Luoyang Sea. Whether it was the number of people watching the movie or the box office record, it created history in Goryeo. Although Sun-sen was praised by the Goryeo people a little too much, he did not live up to his reputation. The Goryeo fleet that he led had an exciting battle with the coastal fleet that Qi Jiguang led. It was also the first time that Goryeo's unique turtle ship entered people's sight. Chapter 1058. On June 11th, a large naval battle broke out on the battlefield of Goryeo. The warring parties were the coastal fleet led by Qi Jiguang and the Goryeo fleet led by Sun-sen. The two sides encountered each other in the waters near Seoul. This was the most intense and tragic naval battle in the history of the game world. The two top fleets fought at sea for 3 days and 3 nights, suffering heavy casualties. The seawater was dyed red, and neither was willing to take the initiative to retreat. The The Great Xia coastal fleet was going to advance into Seoul and cooperate with the land forces to besiege Seoul. The Goryeo fleet had no reason to retreat because behind it was Goryeo's last hope. In the end, the coastal fleet relied on the magic-powered submarines to sink the main force of the Goryeo fleet, the tortoise-shell ships, in one fell swoop and obtained a decisive victory. Then, with the help of the mimicry aircraft, they completed the encirclement and annihilation of the Goryeo fleet. In this battle, more than 40% of the warships of both fleets were sunk. On June 13th, the famous Goryeo General Lee Sun-sin was defeated and captured, and the remnants of the Goryeo fleet surrendered to the Great Xia, signifying that Goryeo no longer had the barrier of the sea, and Seoul was completely exposed to the artillery fire of the coastal fleet. At the same time, the Imperial Guards led by Hua Xiubing had successfully taken over the southern part of Goryeo. In all of Goryeo, only Seoul was left. The final battle of the Battle of Goryeo was on the 14th of June, and it was also the most difficult battle. Just the 500,000 Imperial Guard stationed in Seoul were enough to give Li Jing a headache. Fortunately, Li Jing was not in a hurry, and he still had time. In addition to the battlefield of Goryeo, the battlefield of South Palm and Chenla was equally exciting. Bai Qi did not attack both South Palm and Chenla at the same time, but adopted the tactic of breaking them down one by one. Before the battle, Bai Qi deployed the Annan army to the border of Chenla to focus on defense. At the same time, the Indian Ocean Fleet, led by the evildoers Smoke and Fire, provided support at sea. In this way, the sea and land attacked from both sides, forming a joint line of defense to stabilize Chenla and prevent it from entering the Annan province to stir up trouble. Bai Qi personally led the Dragon Stallion army to attack the South Palm in the north. The Southern Palm was a small country with less than 600,000 players within its borders. Of these, only 70,000 were professional fighters. If one added the 60,000 Imperial Guard stationed in Myriad Phenomenon City and the 30,000 soldiers under Solingen's command, the total military strength was only 160,000, not even half of the Dragon Stallion army. In addition to the hundreds of thousands of Chinese professional players, the army led by Bai Qi was practically invincible in the south. They moved even faster than the battlefield in Korea, reaching Wanxiang City in less than a week. The destruction of the Southern Palm sect was only a short distance away. Zhenla and the Southern Palm sect were interdependent. Logically speaking, when the Southern Palm sect was attacked by the main forces of Great Xia and was about to be destroyed, Zhenla shouldn't just sit back and watch. After all, Great Xia's Annan Corps only defended the east side and did not cut off the northern passage between Southern Palm and Zhenla. However, the reality was that neither the army nor the combat professional players showed any signs of crossing the border to reinforce the Southern Palm country. The entire country was frighteningly quiet. This was human nature. It wasn't that the players of Zhenla were heartless people, and it wasn't that they didn't understand the principle of being in the same boat. To put it bluntly, this was the mentality of an ostrich. If Zhenla sent troops to reinforce the Southern Palm sect, it would definitely cause the defense of the country to be empty, and it was hard to guarantee that Great Xia's Annan Corps and the Indian Ocean Fleet wouldn't take advantage of the situation to invade. If that happened, the losses would outweigh the gains. Under the influence of worrying about personal gains and losses, the players of Zhenla only wanted to defend and protect themselves. They hoped that the Southern Palm sect could last longer so that they could drag out this torturous month. As it turned out, this was just wishful thinking. Once Bai Qi led his troops to take down Wanxiang City, it would be Zhen La's turn. The players of Zhen La might have already realized this, but they were powerless to change it. This was the sorrow of the week. Zhen La, lord by Wen Lai, and South Palm, Lord Solingen, these two traitors, were destined to be nailed to the pillar of shame in history. Japan, Honshu Island. The battlefield of the three major battlefields was still the one in Japan. Over the past week, the Northern Army of China had been rampaging through the northern part of Honshu Island and had fought a few tough battles. Oda Nobunaga was indeed not a mediocre person. He was meticulous in the use of troops, and his use of gunmen was superb. In some of the battlefields, both sides had victories and defeats. Even so, given the disparity in military strength between the two sides, even though the Japanese were fighting on their home ground, it was still futile in front of a divine general like Han Xian. At most times, Han Xian could command 7 armies at the same time without any chaos. They cooperated well with each other, either besieging the enemy and attacking reinforcements, splitting up to attack, or attacking together. His commands were as smooth as flowing water. After opening up a gap in the enemy's army, Han Xian did not give the Japanese any chance to counterattack. He completely suppressed them. The elegance of the weapon immortal was undoubtedly revealed in the Battle of Japan, and it was truly admirable. The tenacity of the Japanese remained the same. Even under such difficult conditions, the entire northern defense line did not collapse. Although it was on the verge of collapse, it miraculously maintained itself. Just like that, Han Xian's plan to take down the northern part of Honshu Island in a week completely failed. At that moment, Ouyang Shuo received a secret report from the Black Snake Guards. According to the investigation, in the past week, the Japanese had secretly transferred troops from the south to the north, hoping to stabilize the northern defense line. At the same time, Keisuke Honda finally convinced the Meiji Emperor to send out 200,000 Imperial Guards to the northern defense line, hoping to strengthen the defense line and maintain the situation. In order to stabilize the defense line, Keisuke Honda did not even hesitate to use the National War Enhancement card that he bought at the auction for 5 million gold coins in advance. He chose to use the 50 defense enhancement for a week. The Battle of Japan seemed to have reached a stalemate. Han Xian received the report and asked Ouyang Shuo if they should continue to conquer the northern lands or directly attack Edo. Seeing that half of the national war was already over, they might not be able to take down Edo if this dragged on. Ouyang Shuo replied, "Continue to sweep. The time limit is 5 days." That day, Ouyang Shuo wrote another strongly worded letter to Di Chun, ordering the southern troops to reach the vicinity of Edo within a week. One must know that on the day Ouyang Shuo wrote the letter, the southern troops had not even completely conquered Shikoku Island. At the end of the letter, Ouyang Shuo wrote, "As one of the leaders of the Huaxia region, how can you be at ease with your conscience? In the future, how can Handan City have the face to stand on the land of Huaxia? The destruction of the Japanese is an irreversible situation. No one can stop it, including those with ulterior motives. I hope that you will reconsider and not end up with a ruined reputation." Although the Earth was already under the federal system and there was no difference between countries, there were still conflicts between civilizations, especially between the Eastern and Western civilizations. Even within the federal system, there were endless conflicts. Even with the tolerance of the Huaxia civilization, they were unable to completely absorb and convert it. And this was one of Ouyang Shuo's future missions. Therefore, from Ouyang Shuo's point of view, Handan City and the 4 great clans behind it did not have to become the mortal enemy of Great Xia. Now, it was up to Di Chun to choose. Chapter 1059. Ouyang Shuo's letter caused the upper echelons of Handan City to be divided. Xiongba and Zhanlang both advocated withstanding the pressure of the Silver Hands, speeding up the speed of mopping up, and rushing to Edo as soon as possible. "We can't be ridiculed by others." Xiongba sighed. Lord Chun did not comment, but Di Chun was clearly hesitant. As for Kil Ruinous and Piao Linghuan, who lost their territories early, they have long lost their right to speak in Handan City. Their current status is only that of a provincial governor, and they have no fate with the army. Xiongba, Zhanlang, and Lord Chun are different. Although their territories have been annexed to Handan City, they still have a lot of autonomy in their own provinces. The troops under them are only under the command of Handan City in name. As the leader, Di Chun had no right to criticize the Scarlet Sun Army, the Conqueror Army, and the Red Blood Army. To make a comparison, Xiongba and the other two's positions were similar to the military governors established by the Tang dynasty. They were in charge of the military and political power of a province. They could also establish their own government and were still high officials of a region. Thus, the three of them could accompany Di Chun in this kingdom war. Of course, with the disbandment of the Yan-Huang alliance and the annexation of the territories to Handan City, Di Chun's reputation had greatly increased. Just like this time, if Di Chun didn't agree, Xiongba and Battle Wolf couldn't do anything. While Di Chun was hesitating, Di Chun's grandfather suddenly sent a letter, asking Di Chun to cooperate with Sanhai City. Di Chun smiled wryly at the sight. It turned out that just 2 days ago, Keisuke Honda's grandfather saw that the situation in Japan was becoming more and more unfavorable, so he finally used his trump card. He directly went to Di Chun's grandfather and promised 10 million gold coins as compensation. More importantly, this person promised that in the future, the Honda family would unconditionally support the Di family. This was a fatal temptation to Grandpa Di Chun. No matter what organization they were in, the relationship between number 1 and number 2 would not be too harmonious. As the number 2 of the Silver Hands, Grandpa Di Chun had been sitting in the number 2 position all these years. The Honda family is a very influential family in Asia, and his vote is very precious. This time, the Honda clan had really gone all out. It must be known that in the Silver Hands, the Honda clan had always followed the lead of the Dawson clan in the American region. This time, in order to save his life, he was forced to change sides. Grandpa Di Chun's words were very clear in his letter. Remember, public opinion can be manipulated. Today, the wind blows in one direction, but tomorrow, it will blow in the other direction. You have to withstand the pressure and not succumb to public opinion. Maximizing the family's interests is the foundation and source of all decisions. Remember, orders could not be disobeyed. Di Chun, this sandwich, could only continue to suffer. At the end of the day, the main character of the Kingdom War was still the territory's army. If Di Chun did not agree, the army of Handan City would naturally not speed up their progress. Even if the accompanying adventurers wanted to attack the island, they would not be able to do so. Over the past few days, adventurer players have been clamoring in front of Emperor Dust's tent. At first, they had generously asked for a fight. Then, it had gradually developed into cursing Di Chun. They had even labeled Di Chun as a traitor. Seeing this, Di Chun decided to be a villain to the end. He arranged soldiers to guard the camp and forbade unauthorized people from entering or leaving. This time, Di Chun was silent, but the Southern Army was in an uproar. Immediately, there were casual players who left the main force. They either returned directly to their country, took a detour to meet up with the Northern Army, or prepared to fight alone in the South. The entire Southern Army suddenly became disorganized. Even the elite groups of super guilds, such as Unhindered Sword Key, 18 Steeds of Swallow and Cloud, Embroidered Uniform Guards, were in a bad mood. They were very dissatisfied with Di Chun. As time passed, this dissatisfaction even began to spread to the upper echelons of the guilds. This was a bad sign, especially for the two super guilds, Tingyu Tower and Lao Jungguan. Previously, because of the change of camp, there was already an internal disturbance. They had no choice but to carry out a shareholding restructuring to calm things down. This time, there was another disturbance. He really did not know how many more times these two guilds would be able to withstand this kind of torment. June 15th, Hokkaido. Not receiving a reply from Di Chun, Ouyang Shua sighed in his heart. Fine, so be it. Since Di Chun refused to come to his senses, Ouyang Shua did not need to show any mercy when he attacked Handan City in the future. The Di family only wanted to protect their family's interests, but Ouyang Shua smashed their cake into pieces. Grandpa Di Chun was so confident because he really did not understand the game. It was different from the real world. Often, a tool could change the direction of a war. Grandpa Di Chun thought that without the cooperation of the Southern Army, Great Xia would not be able to do anything to Edo. He was really wrong. In the afternoon, Ouyang Shua sent the latest military order to Han Xian. Speed up the mopping of progress. 3 days later, all the armies will gather outside Edo. At the same time, Ouyang Shua and his group broke camp again and left Hokkaido. Under the protection of the Royal Navy, they headed straight for Edo. Feng Qiuhuang and the rest saw this and looked at each other in dismay. Ouyang, don't tell me you were thinking of attacking Edo with just the northern army? Ouyang Shuo laughed and said, Di Chun is determined to be a coward. Of course, only we can do it. There are still 800,000 Imperial Guards stationed in Edo. How are we going to fight them? Feng Qiuhuang was still doubtful. If we really can't do it, we can wait for a few more days and urgently transfer another batch of troops from the country. Fallen Phoenix City can also transfer 2 Imperial Guards over. Feng Qiuhuang did not hesitate. In the face of such difficulties, she did not think of retreating. Instead, she chose to go against the wind, displaying the domineering and broad-mindedness of a female hero. Everyone cheered for her. Seeing this, Bloody Romance and the others said one by one, we can also transfer more elite teams over to help. There's a saying that went, get to know a person from their circle of friends. There was another saying, birds of a feather flock together. It was the same principle. The elite players that gathered around Ouyang Shuo all had an unyielding spirit. Dichen admits defeat, but we are not cowards. Isn't it just the Japanese? F*CK them. Bloody Romance was very bold and unrestrained. He was a young hero with a deep sense of nationalism. Seeing this, Ouyang Shuo felt very comforted. He did not make the wrong friends. He smiled and said, I appreciate everyone's kind intentions, but there is no need to go through so much trouble. Bloody Romance's eyes lit up. Brother Ouyang, do you have other trump cards? Ouyang Shuo was a person who often created miracles. If anyone else dared to say something like that, Bloody Romance would probably slap them in the face. But Ouyang Shuo was different. Up until now, Bloody Romance had never seen Ouyang Shuo boast. If Ouyang Shuo said there was no need, then there was no need. Ouyang Shuo nodded and explained, everyone might not know this, but during the National War Month, if a country is the aggressor and is fighting against 3 countries at the same time, Gaia has a special benefit. Chapter 1060. According to the rules of the National War, if a country took the initiative to attack and was at war with 3 other countries at the same time, then the leader of the country could summon 5% of the country's Imperial Guard to assist them at the cost of 10 gold coins per person. For most game regions, the number of Imperial Guards in the capital didn't exceed 1 million. 5% was at most 50,000 Imperial Guards, which was better than nothing and didn't affect the overall situation. However, the Huaxia region was different. The Huaxia region had 10 million Imperial Guards, which meant that they could summon 500,000 Imperial Guards to assist them, which was enough to change the situation. If it was a joint attack from the north and south, there was no need to summon the Imperial Guards. After all, 500,000 Imperial Guard would cost 5 million gold coins. Ouyang Shuo didn't want to spend this money until the last moment. Seeing that Dichen wasn't cooperating, Ouyang Shuo had no choice but to play his trump card. He wanted to see how the Silver Hand would react when the Northern Army conquered Edo alone. Not to mention others, Dichen's grandfather's face would probably be very ugly. Another interesting point was that the Huaxia region had 9 capital cities. Ouyang Shuo could decide which city or how many Imperial Guards to summon. Just this point alone was enough for Ouyang Shuo to do a lot of work. Hearing this, Bloody Romance and the others were all excited. Let's split the money. We can't let you pay alone. That's right, it wasn't just 500,000, but 5 million. Even a wealthy country like Great Xia would struggle to come up with such a sum at once. In addition to this war, Great Xia was already generous enough to provide transportation and food supplies for the adventurers. Ouyang Shuo shook his head. What? Are you looking down on us? I can still afford 1 million, Bloody Romance said unhappily. Ouyang Shuo smiled. That's not what I meant. I'll pay for it first. After we conquer Edo, we'll deduct it from the spoils of war. Edo was huge. It was impossible for them to not have any spoils of war. That's more like it. Bloody Romance's expression softened. On the 17th of June, Ouyang Shuo and his party landed in the western suburbs of Edo. The next day, the Northern Army gathered outside the city. The vast army seemed to cover the sky. Upon closer inspection, one could see traces of exhaustion and sorrow on the faces of the soldiers. The Kingdom War had been going on for half a month, and the North Army had paid a heavy price in order to take down the Japanese. Especially in the last 3 days, in order to clear the last obstacle, the Northern Army did not hesitate to sacrifice themselves and fought with great determination. After a series of battles, less than 800,000 of the 910,000 soldiers of the 13 field legions, including some wounded soldiers, were left. They insisted on rushing to the outskirts of Edo to gather. It wasn't that Ouyang Shuo was ruthless and didn't summon the 500,000 Imperial Army soldiers in advance. Even with the 500,000 Imperial Guardsmen, the coalition army besieging Edo only had about 3 million soldiers. Against the 800,000 Imperial Guardsmen stationed in Edo, they did not have an absolute advantage. Edo was a royal city. How could it be taken down so easily? Not to mention the Japanese battlefield, Han City had yet to be taken down by Li Jing's troops in the Goryeo battlefield. If they wanted to break into the city, they had to outsmart them. The 500,000 Imperial Guards were a trump card. Only by using it when the enemy was least expecting it would they be able to achieve the desired results. On the morning of the 18th, Ouyang Shuo secretly met with Han Xian and briefed him on the matter of the 500,000 Imperial Guards. When Han Xian heard that, he immediately understood. The previous mystery was solved. He said solemnly, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. With this ambush, we will definitely break the enemy's city within 5 days." Ouyang Shuo smiled. "I naturally trust General's ability. If we win this battle, General will be the first to do so. With such outstanding military exploits, the rank of General should also be promoted." Compared to Bai Qi, Hu Zubing, and the other generals, Han Xian valued fame more. Ouyang Shuo hinted that he was going to promote him to the rank of general. He wanted to be on the same level as the 2 divine generals, Bai Qi and Understanding. Naturally, it was a solution to the problem. As expected, a hint of excitement flashed across Han Xian's face, but it quickly disappeared. "I will definitely not let you down." Han Xian made a military order. After coming down, Han Xian began to arrange the troops. Strictly speaking, Edo was considered a coastal city. Therefore, Han Xian handed the southeast side of Edo to the Royal Fleet and the Pacific Fleet. The 2 fleets could use the waterway to bombard Edo, or they could send gunmen to participate in the battle. Apart from the southeast side, Han Xian also placed a large number of troops on the other sides. What outsiders couldn't see was that Han Xian seemed to have distributed the troops around Edo, but in fact the density of the troops was different. Although it was just a small camouflage, the fact that Han Xian was able to do this showed how extraordinary he was. The 800,000 field troops were mostly deployed in the north and east, and only a small number of troops were deployed in the west. Obviously, from the beginning, Han Xian had reserved space for the 500,000 Imperial Guards. The Japanese didn't know any of this. At this time, there was a row of people standing on the city wall of Edo, surrounded by bodyguards. The person standing in the middle was naturally the Meiji Emperor. On his left was the Lord of Mikasa Castle, Keisuke Honda, and on his right was Oda Nobunaga. The 3 most important people in the Japanese camp were gathered here. The layout is quite decent. Who are you trying to fool? Keisuke Honda's expression was much more relaxed than a few days ago. Although his words were sour, there was no fear in them. Ever since he received his grandfather's reply, Keisuke Honda's heart was completely at ease. He didn't believe that the Huasha Northern Army alone could take down Edo. "I'm afraid the other party is in a difficult position now," Oda Nobunaga said. After half a month of dealing with the Japanese, this legendary Japanese figure realized how powerful Huasha was. He was especially impressed by the Great Xia army and Han Xian, who was commanding it. Such a powerful army was indeed not something the Japanese could compare to. Of course, Oda Nobunaga was also very impressed by Keisuke Honda's methods. Until now, he still hadn't figured out how the Lord had convinced the Huasha Southern Army to cooperate. Although the Huasha Southern Army was fighting fiercely with the army led by Toyotomi Hideyoshi in the south of Honshu, it was actually just for show. They weren't serious at all. Otherwise, how could the tens of thousands of troops under Toyotomi Hideyoshi's command stop the enemy? Such methods were truly unpredictable. The Meiji Emperor, who was standing in the middle, was expressionless as he calmly watched the vast army outside the city. After a long time, he said to Oda Nobunaga, "I'll leave the defense of Edo to you, General." This was supposed to be a good job, but Oda Nobunaga felt a little awkward when he heard it. Strictly speaking, Oda Nobunaga wasn't a subject of the Meiji Emperor, but a subordinate of Keisuke Honda. The Meiji Emperor had blatantly bypassed Keisuke Honda and directly issued an order to Oda Nobunaga, which was a breach of the rules. Logically speaking, the Meiji Emperor was a legendary monarch, and he shouldn't have made such a low-level mistake. However, the Meiji Emperor had done so, and the meaning behind it was truly thought-provoking. Following the destruction of the Mikasa City Army, the Meiji Emperor, who had been keeping a low profile, finally revealed his fangs and began to rightfully take over the leadership of Japan. His words just now were a show of force. Keisuke Honda's face visibly twitched when he heard it. That's right. After this battle, although Japan might be able to survive, Mikasa City's vitality would be greatly damaged, and no one knew when it would recover. Gaia had a rule that a gaming zone could only launch a national war against another gaming zone once, and even after the end of the national war, the rule would still be in effect. Such a setting was equivalent to a form of protection for weaker countries. As the saying goes, heaven never bars one's way. There's always a chance of survival. As long as a weaker country could withstand it once, they would basically be able to rest easy. This was also one of the reasons why Korea was willing to participate in this chaotic war. If not for this, the Honda family wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to make such a heavy promise to the Emperor family. Even so, the outcome seemed to be somewhat terrible. Keisuke Honda looked deeply at the Meiji Emperor, then turned to look at Oda Nobunaga, who had been waiting for his approval, and said with a forced smile, "Since the Emperor thinks highly of it, General, accept it." Hi. Oda Nobunaga was caught in the middle, and also felt very awkward. Chapter 1061. On the 19th of June in the 5th year of Gaia, the capital city of Edo. After a short rest, Han Xin commanded the Northern Army to launch a probing attack on Edo. This battle lasted for an entire day. The various divisions took turns to familiarize themselves with the terrain and to find the weak points of the city walls. As a result, although the battle was very lively, there weren't many casualties on both sides. It was considered a warm-up. The enemy's musketeers aren't simple. This was Han Xin's first conclusion. Oda Nobunaga's use of musketeers was indeed refreshing to Han Xin, and he felt that he had learned something. Needless to say, this was the shortcoming of Great Xia's generals. Ouyang Shua smiled and said, "In that case, capture Oda Nobunaga and bring him back to Great Xia to be his instructor." "That's exactly what I'm thinking." Han Xin laughed. The next day, Han Xin got serious. In particular, he launched the most ferocious attacks on Edo from the north and east. Cannons, catapults, mobile arrow towers, and mimic aircraft were all deployed on the battlefield by Han Xin. The moat of Edo wasn't considered a natural moat in front of the expeditionary army. Recently, the physics department led by MOZ had developed a new type of siege equipment, the trestle bridge. This bridge could be folded when not in use and could be pulled by 3 carriages. When attacking a city, as long as the trestle bridge was deployed, the army could easily cross the moat. With this siege weapon, the Great Xia army no longer needed to use soil to attack the city. Instead, they used sand and human lives to fill up the moat, which increased their efficiency by more than 4 to 5 times. This was the power of technology. Influenced by the times, the school of MO kept up with the times and brought forth new ideas. The changes in the school of MO were just a microcosm of the transformation of the 100 schools of thought in Great Xia. Every school was determined to innovate and adapt their theories to the development of the new era. Otherwise, they would be eliminated. It was reported that someone in Great Xia had begun to form a new school to challenge the old 100 schools of thought. This was a new, interesting, and groundbreaking change. It meant that the academic standards of Great Xia had risen to a new level. Another day passed. Under the fierce attack of the Northern Army, Edo remained unmoved like a city of steel. As the sun set, the ground was once again covered in red. For the soldiers who were accustomed to military life, they were already accustomed to such mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Some soldiers even sat on the corpses and wolfed them down without any scruples. Veterans were a fortune. Today's attack on the city was not very smooth. The defense of the city of Edo was somewhat beyond imagination. After preparing for more than half a year, it was indeed not something that could be broken in a day or two. On top of the city wall, Keisuke Honda and Nobunaga stood side by side. 2 days later, Keisuke Honda couldn't understand the enemy outside the city. Are they crazy? With the style of doing things, he couldn't understand why the enemy was so stubborn. You know you can't do it, but you still do it. Foolish. Oda Nobunaga thought differently. As a general, he only had to consider the situation of the battle. He said, "My lord, the enemy's attack should be focused on the east." Keisuke Honda was puzzled. Looking at the situation today, the intensity of the attacks from the north and the east are about the same. Why are you so sure that the enemy is focusing on the east? It's different. Oda Nobunaga was very confident. The enemy's general is very cunning. Although he has made all kinds of arrangements, he still can't hide his true motives. The onslaught from the north is just a facade. Keisuke Honda did not pursue the matter. In terms of actual combat, Keisuke Honda couldn't stand side by side with Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga asked, "My lord, should we mobilize the troops from the east to reinforce the east?" Keisuke Honda thought for a moment and said, "Let's wait for another day to confirm. It's not a big mistake to be careful." He was still a little worried. Understood. The attack from the north was fierce and ferocious. Especially in the east, Guizi led the Blazing Flame Army and fought very resolutely. This unit, which had made outstanding contributions on the battlefield in Japan, was once again the vanguard of the attack. In just 20 days, the casualties of the Blazing Flame Army exceeded 60,000. On average, 3,000 soldiers died in battle every day, which was equivalent to half of the army being destroyed. Although Feng Qiuwang's heart ached, her attitude was very firm. Feng Qiuwang's determination was right. Although the Blazing Flame Army suffered heavy casualties, after experiencing this tough battle, the entire army had already started to transform. Unlike the Great Xia Army, which often fought in wars, the Blazing Flame Army rarely had the opportunity to fight in battles. This kind of tempering was exactly what the Blazing Flame Army needed. Under the continuous attacks of the Blazing Flame Army, the defense of the east side of Edo was finally challenged. Since the afternoon, there had been a continuous stream of Blazing Flame Army soldiers successfully killing their way to the top of the city wall and tearing apart the defense line in Edo. Although they were repelled one by one, Oda Nobunaga's heart still tightened. If he didn't adjust the defense of the army, once a gap was torn open, Edo might really be torn apart by the enemy. Seeing this, Keisuke Honda didn't say anything else and agreed to Oda Nobunaga's plan to transfer troops. From Oda Nobunaga's point of view, the enemy had adopted the classic Huasha tactic of encircling 3 and missing 1. Other than the west side, the other 3 sides could be the main direction of the enemy's attack. After 2 days of observation, Oda Nobunaga was sure that the enemy's real target was the east side. That night, the troops stationed in the west side of Edo began to move to the east. At the same time, a portion of the troops from the north and south sides were also moving to the east. Overnight, Oda Nobunaga quietly strengthened the defense of the east side. Oda Nobunaga wasn't worried that the enemy would play any tricks. They already knew how many troops there were in the north. Furthermore, Japan was surrounded by the sea, and it was impossible for Huaxia to transfer reinforcements in a short period of time. Those who could come were already on the battlefield. If the enemy wanted to create a diversion, they would have to mobilize a large number of troops, and it wouldn't escape Oda Nobunaga's eyes. If that was the case, it would be faster to mobilize troops from within the city than from outside. If the enemy really did that, Oda Nobunaga would only be happy. It meant that he would have a chance to defeat the enemy. June 22nd. Early in the morning, the Huaxia Northern Army began to get busy. The soldiers were woken up by their captain and hurriedly ate 3 steamed buns and a bowl of hot porridge. They began to check their weapons and equipment and gathered at the drill ground. At 7 in the morning, the 4 armies had already left the barracks and were in formation at the front of the city wall. As far as the eye could see, there were swords and spears everywhere. The army was at its peak, and it had a solemn and murderous aura. The sea breeze blew past, and the military flags fluttered in the wind. Each flag represented a legion. The phoenix of the Flame Army, the flying leopard of the Leopard Army, the tiger of the Brave Tiger Army, the black eagle of the Soaring Eagle Army, and the Tang sword and shield of the city guards. Each of them was vivid and lifelike, and they told stories of legends. These were all troops with glorious histories. There were also elite groups mixed in with the army. Although they had all kinds of equipment, after more than 20 days of training, they were no different from an army. They knew when to advance or retreat. Especially the elite troops of the super guilds, they were already in formation according to the requirements of the regular army. To the guilds, such a war was also a training. The elite troops that survived the war would display even more shocking combat power in future adventures in the underground world. War destroyed lives, but also trained people. The bugle horn was blown, followed by the beating of the war drums. Boom, 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 boom. For the millions of soldiers, another day of killing had begun. There was no difference between the same charge. The only difference was that they did not know how many of their comrades would never make it back when they retreated at night. When they returned to their tents, they did not know how many beds would be empty. See you at night. The soldiers greeted each other. Under the leadership of the barracks commander, they charged without hesitation. Kill, kill, kill. The sounds of killing rose and fell from all directions. On the city wall, Oda Nobunaga saw that the enemy had the same arrangement as the day before and felt relieved. With this arrangement, the enemy would not be able to take down Edo. If we hold on for another week, we will be victorious. Oda Nobunaga encouraged himself. As the commander-in-chief of the Japanese army, Oda Nobunaga was under great pressure. When he thought about how the city would be destroyed, he could not sleep at night. The enemy's strength was truly terrifying. To be able to fight such a high-quality siege battle with only a considerable number of troops, throughout history, there were not many people who could do this. Soldier Immortal Han Xin lived up to his name. Of course, the soldiers of the Huaxia Expeditionary Force were also very motivated. Edo will be defended. Oda Nobunaga's gaze was resolute as he turned to patrol the other city walls. Wherever Oda Nobunaga went, the surrounding soldiers would look at him with admiration. It was evident that Oda Nobunaga had unparalleled prestige in the Japanese army. This made Oda Nobunaga feel like he was treading on thin ice. 9 a.m., East Barracks. Last night, Ouyang Shuo had secretly moved from the north to this barracks. His purpose was obvious. Seeing that the siege battle had entered a rhythm and the Japanese garrison was successfully restrained, Han Xin said respectfully, "Your Majesty, we can begin." Ouyang Shuo nodded and said, "Let's go outside." The group rode their horses to the outskirts of the barracks. Any further, and they would be on the battlefield. Ouyang Shuo stood still and opened the National War page in the status panel. He chose to summon the Imperial Army to assist. System notification: congratulations to player, not say you have nothing to wear. The Huaxia region has fulfilled the requirements to summon the Imperial Army. According to the total number of Imperial Army in China, you can summon 500,000 Imperial Army to assist. Please choose the number you want to summon. Friendly reminder: every summon will cost 10 gold coins. Please choose carefully and make sure you have enough funds. According to Gaia, the summoned imperial army would unconditionally obey the command of the leader of the national war. Once the war ended, the remaining imperial army would be automatically teleported back to the monarch city. Summon 500,000. Ouyang Shuo did not hesitate. System notification. The number of summons has been confirmed. Please choose which monarch city or which imperial army to summon. Friendly reminder. The capital and Jianye monarch city do not have an emperor station there. Unable to summon. Ouyang Shuo smiled and said, summon 500,000 imperial army from Dali monarch city. Since it was a reasonable setting, Ouyang Shuo did not mind setting up a trap for the Dali kingdom. It was to lay the groundwork for the future invasion of Dali and remove the obstacles. System notification. The summoning request is reasonable. 5 million gold coins will be deducted automatically. Beginning summoning. Chapter 1062. Accompanied by the sound of the system notification, a dazzling white light suddenly burst out from the western suburbs of Jianghu City and spread rapidly, almost enveloping the entire western suburbs. The white light dissipated, revealing 500,000 Dali Imperial Guards. Dali Imperial Palace. Dali Emperor Duan Zhengchun received the message from the Lord God and could not react for a long time. After a long time, he cursed. Damn it, do you still want me to live? Half of the Imperial Guards were conscripted at once, and Duan Zhengchun wanted to die. Should I take the initiative to abdicate and give up my position? Duan Zhengchun paced back and forth in his study, suddenly thinking of converting to Buddhism. Ever since he appeared in the wilderness and settled in Dali, Duan Zhengchun had not had a good night's sleep. Bad news came one after another. Not to mention the inexplicable appearance of a mutant prince. The entire Dali was barren except for the capital. 10 million people in the city were crying piteously for food, and Duan Zhengchun was so worried that his hair turned white. Even if he had ordered the people to leave the city to cultivate the dragon fields, distant water could not quench the immediate thirst. In desperation, he could only buy food to survive, or the people would revolt. Dali was not short of money, but the problem was that even if they had money, they could not buy food. Dali Prefecture was sealed off from all sides by Great Xia, and all foreign trade channels were cut off. Even if they wanted to smuggle food, no one had the guts to do so. Although Great Xia's Yunnan governor by Hua was a woman, she was after all a feudal lord, and her methods were both tough and soft. When it was time to be tough, she would not be soft at all. Ever since Bai Hua took office, she began to crack down on civilian smuggling to Dali. Once a merchant or caravan was found to be smuggling, according to the Great Xia law, not only would all the goods be confiscated, but they would also be heavily fined. Basically, once this punishment was imposed, the smuggling merchant would go bankrupt. Not only that, from then on, the merchant would be blacklisted by the government. This also meant that the merchant not only had no contact with the government and the military, but also could not go out to sea and was prohibited from engaging in ocean trade. Under Bai Hua's repeated heavy blows, no matter how big the smuggling profits were, no one dared to cross the line. Encountering such an unreasonable neighbor, Duan Zhengchun could only grit his teeth and swallow his anger. The more he spoke, the more tears he would shed. At the moment, the Supreme Court could only rely on the mutants to transport food from other king cities through their storage pouches. Of course, this was just a drop in a bucket, and it could barely keep them warm. Besides, the mutants were not living bodhisattvas. They had taken advantage of Dali's weakness and sold their food at a higher price than gold. Even as wealthy as Dali was, it could not afford such consumption. Ever since Duan Zhengchun settled in Dali, a large number of commoners fled into the Great Xia territory every day. Duan Zhengchun, who believed in Buddhism, could not bear to see the common people starve. Thus, he did not adopt the mutant prince Duan Hong's suggestion to use the imperial army to seal off the border. Instead, he allowed the common people to leave. Such an attitude undoubtedly accelerated the loss of citizens. Duan Zhengchun noticed that the way Duan Hong looked at him had changed. In this child's eyes, Duan Zhengchun saw a naked desire for power and ambition. Unfortunately, Duan Zhengchun did not see in Duan Hong the ability to match his ambition. He has great ambitions, but little talent, Duan Zhengchun concluded. Now, half of the imperial army was inexplicably conscripted away, which was tantamount to cutting off the biggest foundation of the Dali kingdom in the wilderness. It was really a drastic measure. The heavy blow made Duan Zhengchun extremely depressed. Forget it, forget it. After hesitating for a long time, Duan Zhengchun finally made up his mind. Man, here, let the Chamberlain of Dependencies come see me. Yes, Duan Zhengchun finally made up his mind to bow down to the great Xia. As long as he could ensure the continuation of the Duan bloodline, Duan Zhengchun did not mind giving up Dali City. Since this throne is not stable, it is better to take the initiative to step down and avoid being chased away. At this moment, Duan Zhengchun embodied the decisiveness of a resurgent emperor. Throughout history, there have been countless outstanding figures, but how many of them had taken the initiative to give up the throne? The Dali royal family could be considered an anomaly. Just the number of people who converted to Buddhism in their later years was unknown. It was no wonder that Duan Zhengchun had made up his mind. What Duan Zhengchun did not know was that the news of him summoning the Chamberlain of Dependencies and preparing to send a diplomatic mission to the Great Xia to express his intention to surrender had been found out by the mutant prince Duan Hong. A storm was quietly approaching the Dali kingdom. Edo battlefield. The 500,000 imperial army descended from the sky, completely blinding Oda Nobunaga. What kind of operation is this? Oda Nobunaga felt helpless that Huaxia did not play its cards according to common sense. Before he could finish lamenting, the 500,000 imperial army had already rushed towards the west gate under the personal command of Han Exine. The First Legion of the City Guards, who were originally in charge of overseeing the situation, had tacitly retreated from the battlefield. We have soldiers, but we don't use them. Since he had spent a lot of money, Ouyang Shu naturally let the imperial army take the lead. There was a saying, "It's better for you to die than for me to die." If Ouyang Shu knew that this imperial army would eventually submit to the Great Xia, he would probably cry. There was basically no suspense in the following siege battle. The 500,000 imperial army, which had rested their strength, cooperated with Han Exine's smooth command and caught Edo unprepared. If the city was not breached, it would be intolerable. Han Exine was undoubtedly a genius general. No matter how many troops he commanded, he could do it with ease. Even with the 500,000 imperial army, he could still take care of the north, south, and east sides while taking care of the west, not giving Edo any chance. Ouyang Shaw watched from the side, and there was only one word written on his face: General Han Exine. The more the better. It was indeed not an exaggeration. It was indeed a blessing for Great Xia to have the help of such a godly general. At around 5 in the afternoon, with a loud boom, the already weak West Gate was finally breached under the ferocious attack of the 500,000 imperial army. The vast army surged into Edo like a tidal wave. Oda Nobunaga wanted to command the remaining troops to lead the Meiji Emperor and Keisuke Honda out of the siege, but Edo was surrounded on all sides, and there was no way out. Breaking out of the siege time and time again was a futile struggle. As the north and east gates fell, the Meiji Emperor silently returned to the palace and committed suicide. Keisuke Honda was not willing to face his subordinates, nor did he have the face to face his compatriots from the reincarnation hall. He silently found a nameless corner and waited for the end of the war before being teleported to the trial ground. Oda Nobunaga still wanted to struggle, but he was ultimately outnumbered and captured by Han Exine's troops. In the evening, as the army charged into the palace and smashed the Edo monolith, the war in Japan came to an end. System announcements sounded one after another. World announcement: congratulations to the China region for conquering the Japanese and winning the nation war. This is an unparalleled achievement. All China players will be rewarded with 300 nation war contribution points. Congratulations to the China region players. Gaia was indeed generous. There were about 1.65 million Chinese players who participated in the war. If everyone's nation war contribution points were added together, it would be 500 million points. It was an astronomical figure. Indeed, it was as the saying went, there's strength in numbers. That wasn't all. Immediately after, Gaia released another regional announcement. Region announcement. Congratulations to China for conquering Edo and winning the war. Special reward of 500 nation war contribution points for every player who participated in the war in Edo. Congratulations to all players. Gaia was still very fair. They didn't let the Southern Army players take advantage of the situation. There will only be rewards if you put in the effort. Once the announcement was made, loud cheers came from both inside and outside Edo City. Compared to the additional 500 nation war contribution points from Gaia, the players enjoyed the extraordinary glory more. When they returned, it would be enough for them to brag about for the rest of their lives. The adventurer players who were still following the Southern Army were probably regretting their decision. World announcement: Japan has been destroyed. All Japanese players' levels, skills, techniques, and other game achievements will be reset to 0. They will also be teleported to the sealed land as punishment. Once the announcement was made, millions of Japanese players were mercilessly teleported away before they could even cry out. In a nameless corner, Honda Keisuke said to himself, "I'll be back." Saying this, he turned into a white light and disappeared from the secret room with disappointment and melancholy. World announcement: China has won the war and has obtained 10 nation honor points. At the same time, all players in China will be rewarded with 1 innate attribute point. Congratulations to China. When the players in China received the news, they also cheered. This was a feast for the people. 3 days ago, when Bai Qi led his troops to take down the Southern Palm, they had already enjoyed it. As such, the Huaxia region's nation honor points had accumulated to 60 points. If they were to include the foreseeable battles of Goryeo and Chenla, it would reach a terrifying 80 points after the Kingdom Wars. They were only 20 nation honor points away from the 100 nation honor points required to create a second nation weapon. The innate attribute plus 8 bonus from 80 honor points was basically equivalent to doubling the innate aptitude of the players in the China region. How heaven-defying was that? From now on, the Chinese players will be able to dominate the entire world. Tonight, Edo City was destined to be a sleepless night. The victors did not hide their joy and excitement, and were busy celebrating. Although the losers had already left, countless citizens were left behind, trembling in the dark, not knowing what their fates would be. Before attacking Edo, Ouyang Shuo had already made a pact with Feng Qiuhuang, Blood Romance, and the others. After taking down Edo, the army and players were forbidden from looting within the city, and all spoils of war had to be collected and distributed. Anyone who disobeyed the order would be punished by military law. The army was easy to control, and the elite groups of super guilds also had their own principles and pride. However, it was the solo players who were difficult to control. They had finally won a battle, so how could they not reap the spoils of war? Because of this, the entire Edo city was stirred up. Although Ouyang Shuo had arranged for the army and elite groups to maintain order on the streets, he could not go too far. He only arranged for the army to guard the treasury, the palace, and other important places. The other places could only be looted by the players. Hundreds of thousands of adventurers roamed around the city like locusts, plundering everything of value they could find without the slightest scruple. The entire Edo city trembled in the dark, and it was the most difficult night. Chapter 1063. Shikoku Island, Southern Route Army Station. The moment Dichin learned that Edo had been conquered, he was completely dumbfounded and didn't know how to react. How is this possible? Dichin couldn't believe it. How did the Northern Route Army break through the heavily guarded Edo in such a short time? It couldn't have been reinforcements from Great Xia. Investigate. Investigate thoroughly. Dichin ordered. Yes, sir. Soon, an intelligence officer from Imperial Wind left to carry out the order. Other than Imperial Wind, in Handan City, Yanhuang Alliance also had Spring Dawn in Danyang City, Battle Song in Blood Red City, and Wind and Cloud in Hejimen City. After the merger, the three intelligence agencies became branches of Imperial Wind, making Imperial Wind a superintelligence agency comparable to Mountain Sea Guards. Because the national war was over and the forum was unblocked, it wasn't difficult for Imperial Wind to find out about this. After reading the report, Di Chen's face turned livid and he said angrily, "He's using public resources for private purposes. Why didn't he inform us in advance about such an important matter?" In this matter, Ouyang Shuo was indeed a bit dishonest. But Ouyang Shuo was the leader of the national war. Even if he didn't report it, no one could blame him as long as he successfully conquered Japan. Di Chun and the others had suffered a loss, but they could only suffer in silence. There's no point talking about this now. Let's think about how to deal with the aftermath. Xiongba said, "Yes, in order to cooperate with the Di family's demands in the Silver Hand, Handan City deliberately slowed down the army and even ignored Ouyang Shuo's edict twice in a row. This behavior was already considered betrayal, and it was much more serious than Ouyang Shuo's concealment. Handan City was facing the biggest trust crisis in the history of Huaxia. If it wasn't handled well, they would lose the support of the people, lose their allies, and become isolated. Especially Di Chun himself, who was at the forefront of the storm and would face the harshest criticism. Just thinking about this made Di Chen's heart tremble. Di Chen asked, "Do you have any ideas?" Xiongba thought for a while and said, "There are two most important things right now. First, send someone to discuss with the old fox about how to divide Japan. The second is to use all the power at our disposal to change the public opinion. Although we won't be able to turn right and wrong upside down, we should at least ease the hostility towards the players. After all, Japan was conquered. The players aren't as angry as before," Xiongba added. Di Chen nodded. "As for the second matter, Grandpa and the others should have already made arrangements, so we don't need to worry about it. However, the former matter is worth discussing." After a pause, Di Chun glanced at Xiongba and the others and said, "How do you think we should divide Japan?" With Handan City's character, it was impossible for them to give up Japan, even without considering the benefits at hand. Once Great Xia takes over all of Dongying, it will definitely form a blockade on Handan City across the sea. The ocean trade with the Dawson dynasty had already become the lifeline of Handan City's trade, and Japan just so happened to be at the heart of this trade route. Once Great Xia grabbed them by the neck, Handan City's future was unimaginable. Xiongba said, "We shouldn't have any expectations for Benjo Island. The best result would be whoever conquered it owns it. As long as we can occupy Kyushu Island and Shikoku Island, we will have accomplished our goal." Di Chen nodded, helplessly accepting this reality. He glanced at Xiongba and said, "How about you represent Handan City and go to Edo to negotiate with the old fox?" Sure. Among everyone present, Xiongba had the best relationship with Ouyang Shuo, so he was indeed the most suitable candidate. At the same time, congratulate the old fox. Don't make us look bad. Di Chen's instructions were also in hopes of slightly dispelling the Huaxia players' resentment toward Handan City. Xiongba nodded and said, "I will set off tomorrow." June 23rd, Edo City. The morning sun shone on the dilapidated Edo City, but couldn't bring any warmth to the city. The looting that lasted for a night did not stop. Instead, it became more and more intense. In a courtyard in the city, Ouyang Shuo, Feng Xiaohuang, Crimson Romance, and the others were having breakfast while discussing how to deal with Edo City and the whole of Japan. Edo City was easy to deal with. After all, it was taken by the Northern Army alone. Ouyang Shuo and the others had the right to deal with it. The problem now was how to divide Japan. Should each side take an island or something else? In my opinion, we should use the opportunity of opening the teleportation formation to send more troops over and chase the Handan City army out of Japan. I get annoyed when I see them," Feng Xiaohuang said domineeringly. The 300,000 Imperial Guards of Dali were teleported away as soon as the Battle of Edo ended. Similarly, because Edo City was taken by the Great Xia Army and Ouyang Shuo was the leader of the Huaxia region's national war, he successfully took over the royal city of Edo and opened the teleportation formation. Feng Qiuhuang's suggestion was very practical. Ouyang Shuo was tempted when he heard it. After thinking about it carefully, Ouyang Shuo immediately sobered up and didn't let his desire get to his head. He shook his head and said no. What would the Huaxia players think if we start an internal strife right after the national war ended? No matter what, the Southern Army did contribute in this battle. They took down Kyushu and Shikoku Islands with real force. It would be too unsightly to chase them away just like that. Ouyang Shuo saw further than Feng Qiuhuang. The confrontation between the two giants, Great Xia and Handan City, had dragged on for a long time. If they really wanted to determine the victor, it wouldn't be about the gains or losses of one city or one land, but the hearts of the people. If Great Xia really wanted to defeat Handan City, they had to do it openly. It wasn't easy for Handan City to make a huge mistake and lose the hearts of the people. Ouyang Shuo wouldn't make a big fuss over two small islands just for small profit. If he really did that, with the glib tongues of the four great clans, they would immediately change from traitors to victims and gain the sympathy of the players. That would be losing the big picture for the small. When Feng Qiuhuang heard Ouyang Shuo's explanation, she took a deep look at him, and a trace of absent-mindedness flashed in her eyes. Since when did this man stand at such a height to consider problems and need her to look up to him? It was really unfortunate for the four great clans to meet such an opponent. And should we just let them off so easily? It wasn't easy for them to conquer Edo, but Di Chun and the rest were just sitting back and enjoying the fruits of their labor. Feng Qiuhuang was still somewhat indignant. Let's wait and see. We have to take things one step at a time. We can't be impatient. Feng Qiuhuang nodded. You should stabilize yourself now. At the dining table, Ouyang Shuo and the rest only decided on a general division plan. Great Xia would occupy Hanzhou Island, Luofeng City would occupy Hokkaido, and Kyushu and Shikoku Islands would be given to Handan City. The specific inventory of resources and distribution of spoils of war would naturally be handled by the subordinates. After opening the teleportation portal, Ouyang Shuo had already urgently transferred a group of civil officials from Shanghai City to assist. Apart from that, there was also the division of the prisoners of war. According to rough statistics, from the beginning of the battle in Hokkaido until the conquest of Edo, the Northern Army captured more than 60,000 soldiers from the Mikasa City territory and 420,000 soldiers from the Japanese Imperial Guards. That was a total of 480,000 prisoners of war. In terms of battle losses, the Blazing Flame Army lost more than 80,000 soldiers, which was more than a legion. The Great Xia Army didn't have it easy either. Apart from the damage to the Navy, the land forces alone lost more than 100,000 soldiers. If the losses to the Dali Imperial Guards were taken into account, this battle wasn't easy at all. Ouyang Shuo and Feng Qiuhuang calculated that after replenishing the losses, there would be an estimated 300,000 prisoners of war left, which could be streamlined and reorganized into 4 field legions. There's no need to divide them. Each of us will have 2 legions, Ouyang Shuo said. During the battle in Japan, the Blazing Flame Army fought valiantly and fought in a few key battles. They were willing to be the vanguard every time and achieved outstanding military merits. As such, Ouyang Shuo wouldn't mistreat his allies. Feng Qiuhuang didn't say anything and nodded in agreement. There was no need for pleasantries between the two of them, as they had already formed a tacit understanding. Apart from making concessions on the distribution of prisoners of war, Ouyang Shuo also tried his best to favor Luofeng City in the distribution of spoils of war. Apart from the portion that was allocated to the adventurers, the rest of the captured weapons, equipment, and rations were distributed to Luofeng City and transported back to Hokkaido. After the previous looting, Hokkaido was already on the verge of collapse and urgently needed this batch of supplies. The sins that Ouyang Shuo had committed required Feng Qiuhuang's help. Such a distribution wasn't because Ouyang Shuo was trying to be a good person and was too generous. Instead, it was because Great Xia had gained too much from the start. Putting everything else aside, just taking over Honshu Island and occupying the royal city of Edo was already something that no equipment or supplies could compare to. Since Feng Qiuhuang took the initiative to give up Honshu Island, how could Ouyang Shuo not return the favor? In fact, Ouyang Shuo was even prepared to move 3 million Edo citizens to Hokkaido to make up for it. As for how to plan for Honshu Island, Ouyang Shuo already had a plan in mind. He planned to change the name of Honshu Island to Yingzhou Prefecture. Its status would be equivalent to Jingzhou Prefecture and Yizhou Prefecture. It would be directly under the jurisdiction of the imperial court. One had to know that Honshu Island was the 7th largest island in the world. Its area was equivalent to a province and was more than 3 times the area of Jingzhou Prefecture and Yizhou Prefecture combined. Not to mention establishing a prefecture, it could even establish a province. There were many large ports in Yingzhou Prefecture. In the future, it would be a large transit station for Great Xia's trade with South America. It would also be a bridgehead for Great Xia to attack North America. Its strategic location was extremely important. Because of this, the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet would soon be moved to Yingzhou Prefecture. Logically, the 2 field legions that were reorganized from the prisoners of war would be combined into the Yingzhou Corps. They would be responsible for protecting the land of Yingzhou Prefecture, mainly guarding against Shikoku Island and Kyushu Island in the south. With the international teleportation portal, it was sufficient for the Yingzhou Corps to maintain 2 standing legions. As for the commander of the Yingzhou Corps, Ouyang Shuo had long decided on Zhang Shiji, one of the 3 heroes of the late Song dynasty. As for the other general, Yu Fei, who was still in the military lecture hall, Ouyang Shuo had other arrangements. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.